How does a tribe of nomads from the Central Asian steppe come to rule a vast empire stretching from the borders of China to the Mediterranean Sea? The story of the Seljuks is not one of sudden conquest or fleeting fortune. It is a transformation, a migration that reshaped the map of the Islamic world, revived the power of the Abbasid Caliphate, and set in motion the cultural foundations of what would later become the Ottoman Empire. This is the entire story of the Seljuk Empire, a story of how a frontier tribe became the architects of a new Islamic world. Long before the Seljuk Empire became a power stretching from Central Asia to the Mediterranean, its story began on the open steppes along the Sirdarya River. This vast region, lying between the Aral Sea and the borders of modern Kazakhstan, was home to countless Turkic tribes who lived by the rhythm of migration, herding, and warfare. Among them were the Oghuz Turks, a confederation of nomadic clans who traced their lineage through shared ancestry and oral tradition. From within this federation, one small clan would eventually alter the course of Islamic and world history. To understand how the Seljuks rose from obscurity, we must first understand the steppe world itself. The 9th and 10th centuries BCE were an age of shifting alliances, tribal confederations, and fierce independence. Power was not measured by land ownership, but by the size of one's herd, the loyalty of warriors, and the ability to control trade routes that connected China to the Islamic lands of Transoxiana. The steppe was both a frontier and a crossroads, where cultures met and rivalries clashed. The Oghuz Turks had long lived under the rule of the Oghuz Yabgu, a semi-monarchical leader who coordinated tribal affairs. Their territory lay near the Aral Sea, bordering the Khazar Khaganate to the west and the Samanid domains to the south. The Oghuz were not a single unified nation, but rather a collection of clans loosely bound by language, custom, and defense. Among them, a man named Seljuk ibn Dukak began to rise in prominence. Seljuk, the founder of the dynasty that would later bear his name, is said to have been a capable military leader and an astute observer of politics. His father, Dukak, served as a chief under the Oghuz Yabgu, but disagreements over power and policy eventually drove Seljuk to break away from his overlord. Leading his followers southward, he settled near the frontier town of Jand, located along the lower Sirdarya. This seemingly small act, moving a clan to the edge of the Islamic world, was the first turning point in Seljuk history. At Jand, Seljuk and his tribe encountered the great cultural and religious forces that would shape their destiny. The region was under the influence of the Samanid Empire, a Persianate Muslim power centered in Bukhara and Samarkand. The Samanids promoted Sunni Islam and sponsored missionaries and scholars across Central Asia. Trade and travel along the Silk Road brought not only goods, but also ideas, and for the first time, the Turkic nomads of the north came into sustained contact with Islamic civilization. It was during this period that Seljuk and his followers converted to Islam. While exact dates are uncertain, most historians place the conversion around the late 9th or early 10th century. The choice was not merely spiritual, it carried profound social and political meaning. By embracing Islam, Seljuk aligned his people with the most dynamic cultural and political system of the age. Conversion opened new alliances with Muslim rulers, traders, and scholars, and distinguished his clan from the still pagan or Tengrist tribes of the steppe. The adoption of Islam did not erase their Turkic heritage. The Seljuks continued to live as nomads, skilled horsemen and archers who moved with the seasons. Yet their new faith brought a shared moral code and a unifying purpose. Mosques and scholars began to appear in their encampments, and Arabic and Persian terms entered their vocabulary. The tribe that had once been defined by blood and migration now found cohesion through belief. By the early 10th century, the Seljuks had become a distinct and organized group, independent from the Oghuz Yabgu. Their growing strength began to attract both attention and suspicion. The Oghuz leadership viewed Seljuks' independence as rebellion, while neighboring Muslim rulers saw an opportunity to harness his military power. Seljuk's strategic settlement near Jand allowed his followers to raid both the steppe and settled lands, giving them wealth and experience. This dual frontier existence, part pastoral, part political, became the foundation of their rise. Seljuk's growing influence soon brought him into conflict with regional powers. The Ghaznavids, an emerging Turkic dynasty ruling from the southeast, and the Samanids to the southwest, both sought to control the frontier. But the Seljuks, hardened by mobility and guided by a new faith, were difficult to subdue. Their loyalty to Islam did not make them servants of any particular ruler. Instead, they became a self-governing tribal power capable of negotiating on equal terms with their more urbanized neighbors. By this time, Seljuk's sons, Mikhail, Musa, Yunus, and Arslan Israel, had begun to take leading roles. The family was establishing a legacy of military skill and political calculation that would define the dynasty for generations. Of these, Arslan Israel would later stand out as a capable commander, remembered for his early clashes with the Ghaznavids and for guiding the tribe through turbulent decades. The Seljuk family's Islamic faith also gave them a deeper connection with the broader Muslim world. They supported local scholars and religious leaders, building a reputation as defenders of Sunni orthodoxy. This reputation would later be a critical factor in winning the support of the Abbasid caliphs. What began as a personal conversion would evolve into a grand narrative of religious legitimacy, a steppe-born dynasty claiming to restore Islamic unity and justice. The 10th century also brought wider changes to Central Asia. The Samanid Empire, once a major center of Persian Islamic culture, was weakening under internal pressure and the rise of Turkic slave soldier elites known as Mamluks. In the east, the Karakhanids were expanding from the Fergana Valley, while in the south, the Ghaznavids under Mahmud of Ghazni were growing into a formidable empire. The steppe frontier was in flux, and every shift created new opportunities for ambitious tribes like the Seljuks. It was within this dynamic environment that the Seljuks honed their identity. They were no longer mere nomads, but a mobile political community, armed, organized, and ideologically grounded in Islam. Their mobility allowed them to exploit gaps in imperial control, while their religious identity opened doors to alliances that other tribes could not access. Step by step, they moved from survival to strategy, from independence to influence. Historians have often emphasized the pragmatic nature of the Seljuks' early decisions. Their migration to Jand was not an accident, but a calculated move to position themselves near trade routes and Islamic markets. Their conversion to Islam was not forced, but embraced as a means of integration and legitimacy. These choices would give the Seljuks the tools to navigate a world that valued both martial strength and moral authority. By the dawn of the 11th century, the Seljuk clan had already established itself as a distinct and formidable power on the edges of the Islamic world. They were no longer merely a migrating tribe, but a disciplined and ambitious community poised between two civilizations, the nomadic world of the steppe and the urban centers of Khorasan. Their conversion to Islam had linked them spiritually and politically to the heart of the Muslim world, but their origins still bound them to the traditions of mobility, warfare, and independence. This dual identity would soon bring them into direct conflict with both their former tribal overlords and the powerful empires that sought to control the frontier. The Seljuks' first great challenge came from within their own Turkic world. The Oghuz Yabgu, ruler of the wider Oghuz Confederation, viewed Seljuk Beg's descendants as rebels. Their departure from the traditional Oghuz domains and growing ties with the Muslim South were seen as a betrayal of old loyalties. In retaliation, the Yabgu launched raids and political pressure against the Seljuks. The Seljuks, however, held their ground, relying on their fortified base near Jand and the martial skills that had defined their tribe for generations. This early conflict revealed something new about the Seljuks, their ability to endure political isolation and turn adversity into strength. Rather than seeking reconciliation with the Yabgu, they deepened their alliances with Muslim powers in the south. The nearby Samanid governors, who ruled from Bukhara and Nishapur, recognized the military value of having a disciplined Turkic ally on the northern frontier. The Seljuks became useful as border defenders and as a buffer against steppe raiders. But the balance of power in Central Asia was shifting rapidly. The once mighty Samanid Empire was collapsing under the weight of internal rebellions and the growing influence of Turkic slave soldier elites. As Samanid authority crumbled, two rising forces competed for control of Khorasan, the Ghaznavids to the southeast and the Karakhanids to the northeast. Both were Turkic in origin, but had adopted the administrative and cultural norms of Persian Islamic governance. The Seljuks now stood between these expanding powers, and their next choices would define their future. Leadership within the Seljuk family was now passing to the second generation, particularly to Seljuk's grandsons Tugril Beg and Chagri Beg, sons of Mikhail. Their uncle Arslan Israel, another of Seljuk's sons, had earlier emerged as a respected warrior and political leader, taking charge of much of the tribe's affairs. It was Arslan who first came into direct contact with the Ghaznavid rulers, a relationship that began with diplomacy and ended in captivity. The Ghaznavids, under Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, had forged a powerful empire that extended from Afghanistan into northern India and parts of Iran. Mahmud, famed for his campaigns into the Indian subcontinent, was also determined to secure his western frontier. The Seljuks, operating near the borders of Khwarezm and Khorasan, were both a potential threat and a potential ally. Mahmud's court invited Arslan Israel to enter Ghaznavid service, promising rewards and recognition in exchange for loyalty. But the Seljuks valued their independence too highly. Negotiations turned tense, and when Arslan attempted to assert greater autonomy, Mahmud ordered his arrest. Arslan Israel was imprisoned, and many of his followers were forced to flee. This event marked a turning point. The imprisonment of Arslan Israel, though a setback, revealed the limits of Seljuk submission to external power. Tugril Beg and Chagri Beg, now emerging as the main leaders, learned a crucial lesson from their uncle's fate. Survival depended on flexibility, timing, and the ability to exploit imperial rivalries. They withdrew from the Ghaznavid orbit and began consolidating their people in the borderlands of Khorasan, an area rich in opportunity but fraught with danger. Khorasan in the early 11th century was a land of transition. Once under firm Samanid control, it was now contested by Ghaznavid armies and Karakhanid incursions. The region's towns, Nishapur, Merv, and Herat, remained centers of Persian culture and Islamic scholarship, but beyond the cities lay vast stretches of unsettled land ideal for nomadic occupation. The Seljuks, masters of mobility, took advantage of this situation. They began to migrate southward into Khorasan, seizing pastures and forming alliances with local leaders disillusioned with Ghaznavid taxation and control. Their strategy was subtle but effective. Rather than launching a massive invasion, they moved in stages, sending small groups of warriors and families to establish footholds in key regions. These groups were often welcomed by local villagers, who saw them as protection against bandits and rival tribes. In return, the Seljuks gained food, resources, and intelligence about the political landscape. Tugril and Chagri coordinated these movements with remarkable discipline, ensuring that their growing population did not appear as an invading horde, but as a stabilizing force. At the same time, the Ghaznavids were struggling to maintain order in Khorasan. Sultan Mahmud's death and the succession of his son, Mas'ud, created political instability. Mas'ud inherited an empire that was rich but overstretched. His focus remained on India, where he continued his father's campaigns, while Khorasan became increasingly vulnerable. The Seljuks, recognizing this weakness, began to push further into Ghaznavid-held territory. Clashes inevitably followed. Skirmishes between Seljuk horsemen and Ghaznavid garrisons grew frequent. Yet the Seljuks often won not through overwhelming numbers, but through superior mobility and intelligence. Their ability to strike quickly and vanish into the steppe frustrated the more conventional Ghaznavid armies, which relied on heavy cavalry and fixed supply lines. Over time, the Seljuks' reputation as formidable warriors spread across the region. Tugril Beg, described by chroniclers as patient, deliberate, and pious, began to shape a vision for the tribe's future. He and his brother Chagri believed that the Seljuks could no longer survive as wanderers between empires. They had to seize a permanent base of power. This vision was not born of greed, but necessity. Without secure territory, their people remained at the mercy of larger states. Khorasan, with its fertile lands and Islamic prestige, offered the ideal foundation for an empire. The Ghaznavids, realizing the growing Seljuk threat, finally took decisive action. Sultan Mas'ud assembled a large army to expel the Seljuks from Khorasan once and for all. His campaign culminated in a confrontation that would later be remembered as one of the defining moments in medieval Central Asian history, the battle that transformed the Seljuks from refugees into rulers. But before that decisive encounter, the Seljuks faced years of hardship and adaptation. In their early years in Khorasan, the Seljuks relied heavily on diplomacy as well as war. They sought to win over local Persian notables and religious leaders, presenting themselves as defenders of Sunni Islam against both the Ismaili Shia movements and the heavy-handed Ghaznavid bureaucracy. Their simple nomadic lifestyle, combined with their evident devotion to the faith, earned them respect among scholars and villagers alike. The Seljuks' rise, therefore, was not merely military. It was moral and social. They positioned themselves as just rulers who would bring stability to regions long troubled by imperial neglect. Another key factor in their success was the tribal structure of their society. Leadership was shared among family members, with Tugril and Chagri maintaining close cooperation despite occasional rivalry. Their followers were organized into clans that could mobilize rapidly for war or settlement. This decentralized yet disciplined system allowed them to adapt to the shifting conditions of the frontier more effectively than the bureaucratic empires they faced. The early decades of the 11th century were years of turbulence across Central Asia. Old empires were faltering, new ones were rising, and frontiers shifted as swiftly as the winds over the desert plains. In this dynamic setting, the Seljuks began their decisive push from survival to supremacy. What began as a struggle for pasture and security soon became a campaign for empire. The Seljuks, under the leadership of Tugril Beg and Chagri Beg, transformed from frontier raiders into the founders of a dynasty that would dominate the Islamic world for generations. By the time the Seljuks settled in the northern fringes of Khorasan, they were already a disciplined and united force. They had survived exile, internal divisions, and conflict with the Ghaznavids. They had learned to move swiftly, negotiate wisely, and strike decisively. Yet despite their growing strength, they still lacked one crucial element: recognition. To the established powers of the region, they remained nomadic outsiders, valuable as mercenaries perhaps, but not legitimate rulers. Tugril and Chagri were determined to change that perception. Khorasan was one of the richest provinces of the Eastern Islamic world. Once governed by the Samanids and now under Ghaznavid control, it was a land of ancient cities, fertile oases, and deep cultural prestige. To rule Khorasan meant commanding both wealth and legitimacy, but it was also a region plagued by instability. The Ghaznavid governors imposed heavy taxes on farmers and merchants, leading to widespread resentment. Bandits, rebels, and tribal militias roamed the countryside. Into this environment came the Seljuks, armed, organized, and eager to prove themselves as the region's new protectors. Their early strategy was measured. Instead of launching an open war against the Ghaznavids, they expanded gradually, occupying unguarded areas and forming alliances with local landowners. The Seljuks' reputation for discipline and fair conduct helped them gain support among Persian villagers and townsmen who were weary of Ghaznavid exploitation. Tugril and Chagri also courted the local religious leaders, emphasizing their Sunni Muslim faith and portraying themselves as defenders of justice. By positioning themselves as champions of the faith rather than mere conquerors, they began to win the moral support of Khorasan's population. Still, their growing influence could not escape the notice of Sultan Mas'ud of Ghazni. He viewed the Seljuks as troublesome intruders threatening his northern frontier. The Ghaznavid army, though powerful, was stretched thin by campaigns in India and Central Asia. Sultan Mas'ud initially attempted diplomacy, offering the Seljuks small territories in exchange for military service. But Tugril and Chagri refused to become subordinates. They sought sovereignty, not vassalage. By the early 1040s, the situation had escalated beyond negotiation. Skirmishes between Seljuk and Ghaznavid forces became common across the plains of Khorasan. Each side tested the other's strength, probing weaknesses and securing allies. The Seljuks, with their light cavalry, had the advantage of speed and terrain familiarity. They could strike supply lines, disappear into the steppe, and reappear hundreds of miles away. The Ghaznavids, dependent on heavy cavalry and fixed supply routes, struggled to keep pace. During this period, Chagri Beg led several key campaigns that solidified Seljuk control in the frontier zones. One of the most important victories came near Nisa, where Seljuk forces ambushed and defeated a Ghaznavid detachment, capturing supplies and horses. These victories were not just tactical, they were psychological. For the first time, the once nomadic Seljuks had proven that they could defeat a standing imperial army. Word of their success spread rapidly through Khorasan, drawing more Turkic warriors and local supporters to their banner. Sultan Mas'ud, alarmed by the growing threat, decided to take direct action. He gathered a large army from across his dominions, troops from India, Khorasan, and Afghanistan, and marched westward to crush the Seljuks once and for all. Chroniclers describe the Ghaznavid army as vast and well-equipped, carrying siege engines, heavy armor, and war elephants. The Seljuks, in contrast, relied on mobility, archery, and tactical coordination. What they lacked in equipment, they compensated for with agility and intelligence. In the spring of 1040, the two forces met near the oasis of Dandankan, close to modern Merv. The battle that followed would become one of the defining moments of medieval Islamic history. Sultan Mas'ud, confident in his numerical superiority, advanced deep into Seljuk territory. But Tugril and Chagri employed a strategy honed through years of frontier warfare. Rather than confronting the Ghaznavids in a single decisive clash, they adopted a war of attrition. For days, Seljuk horsemen harassed the Ghaznavid columns, cutting off supply lines and ambushing foraging parties. The desert sun and lack of water took a toll on the heavily armored Ghaznavid troops. Communication broke down and morale faltered. When Mas'ud finally attempted to force a direct engagement near Dandankan, the Seljuks struck with devastating precision. Their cavalry encircled the Ghaznavid forces, showering them with arrows before charging in coordinated waves. The Ghaznavid army collapsed under pressure, and Sultan Mas'ud was forced to flee. The victory at Dandankan was total. It ended Ghaznavid dominance in Khorasan and marked the birth of the great Seljuk state. Tugril Beg was proclaimed Sultan by his followers, a title that signified sovereignty and divine legitimacy. The nomads of the steppe had become rulers of cities and lands. This transformation carried deep meaning. The Seljuks did not merely replace one ruler with another, they introduced a new political order. Their rise symbolized the fusion of Turkic military culture with Persian administrative tradition and Islamic legitimacy. Tugril's court began to adopt Persian bureaucratic practices while maintaining the Turkic ethos of merit and mobility. This blend of traditions would become a hallmark of Seljuk governance and later influence empires such as the Ottomans. The aftermath of Dandankan also reshaped the region's political geography. The Ghaznavids retreated eastward to Afghanistan and India, focusing their energies there for the rest of their history. The Seljuks took control of Nishapur, Merv, and Herat, key centers of Khorasan. These cities, long symbols of Islamic scholarship and culture, became the foundation of a new empire. Scholars, jurists, and poets welcomed the Seljuk leadership who promised justice and protection. Tugril and Chagri, guided by religious scholars, ensured that taxes were moderated and that trade routes remained secure. Khorasan now entered a period of relative stability under Seljuk rule. The tribes that had once followed the Seljuks as nomads began to settle, transforming into a disciplined military elite. Persian administrators, many of them former Samanid officials, joined the Seljuk government, helping to establish systems of taxation, law, and diplomacy. The early Seljuk state thus became an example of cultural synthesis, Turkic in its military backbone, Persian in its administration, and Islamic in its ideology. The victory at Dandankan also elevated the Seljuks' standing in the wider Islamic world. Word of their triumph reached Baghdad, where the Abbasid Caliph still held spiritual authority despite political weakness. For the Caliph and the scholars of the Sunni world, the rise of the Seljuks was a welcome development. It promised a strong Sunni Muslim power that could counterbalance the influence of the Shia Fatimids in Egypt and the declining Buyids in Persia. In later years, this alignment between the Abbasid Caliphate and the Seljuks would shape the politics of the entire Middle East. For Tugril Beg personally, Dandankan marked the beginning of his journey from frontier commander to imperial ruler. Contemporary accounts describe him as humble and devout, yet determined and strategic. His brother Chagri remained an indispensable partner, governing parts of Khorasan while Tugril focused on expansion westward. Their unity during these formative years was essential. They understood that conquest alone was not enough. They had to build a state that could last. In the years following the victory, the Seljuks worked to consolidate their power. They established garrisons in key cities, distributed land to loyal commanders under the Akta system, and created networks of allegiance that bound tribal leaders to the central authority. The Akta, which granted land revenues in exchange for military service, allowed the Seljuks to sustain a professional army without the burden of direct taxation. This innovation, refined by later generations, became a defining feature of Islamic governance. The Seljuks' success in Khorasan also inspired other Turkic groups to join them. Warriors and nomads from the steppes of Transoxiana flocked to their banner, drawn by the promise of land, faith, and fortune. This influx strengthened the Seljuk army, but also required careful management. Tugril and Chagri balanced tribal loyalties with administrative discipline, ensuring that their expanding force remained cohesive. The victory at Dandankan had changed everything. For the first time, the Seljuks were not just survivors or frontier warlords, they were rulers of a vast and fertile province. From the deserts of Khorasan, Tugril Beg and Chagri Beg now looked westward toward Persia and the heart of the Islamic world. What awaited them was not just land, but legitimacy, not merely conquest, but governance. Their next challenge was to transform military victory into political order and to define what kind of empire the Seljuks would become. The early years after Dandankan were spent consolidating control. Tugril, recognized by his followers as Sultan, ruled as the senior member of the dynasty, while his brother Chagri governed Khorasan. The division of responsibility between them was strategic. Tugril focused on diplomacy and expansion into western Iran, while Chagri maintained stability in the east, ensuring that the new empire had a secure base of power. Their partnership was one of the great strengths of the Seljuk rise. Though disagreements occurred, both men shared the same vision: to unite the Islamic world under strong Sunni rule. The Seljuk conquest of western Iran began soon after Dandankan. Tugril led his forces into the region of Gurgan and Mazandaran, defeating local rulers and incorporating their territories into the growing state. His campaign was not one of destruction, but of integration. Tugril understood that an empire built on fear would not last. He sought instead to win over the local Persian elites who had centuries of experience in administration and diplomacy. By maintaining Persian officials in government positions and respecting local customs, Tugril ensured a relatively smooth transition of power. From Gurgan, the Seljuk armies advanced toward the great cities of northern Iran, Rey, Hamadan, and Isfahan. Each city represented a step closer to the heart of the Islamic world and to the seat of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. But these conquests were not uncontested. In western Iran, the Buyid dynasty, a Shia Persian house that had dominated the region for decades, still held sway. The Buyids controlled Baghdad and exerted heavy influence over the Abbasid Caliph, who remained a symbolic figure under their protection. For Sunni Muslims across the empire, the Buyid dominance was a source of deep resentment. Tughril saw an opportunity not only to expand his realm but to present himself as the defender of Sunni orthodoxy. In the early 1050s, Tughril marched into central Iran and confronted the Buyids. His forces, composed largely of Turkic cavalry supported by local levies, proved superior to the fragmented Buyid armies. City after city opened its gates to the Seljuks, often preferring Sunni rule to the declining Shia regime. By the time Tughril entered Isfahan, one of Persia's most important cities, he was already being hailed as the champion of Orthodox Islam. Isfahan soon became one of the key administrative centers of the Seljuk state. Persian scholars, jurists, and administrators flocked to Tughril's court, bringing with them the intellectual and bureaucratic traditions that would shape the empire. It was during these formative years that the Seljuk government began to take its distinctive form, a fusion of Turkic military leadership and Persian bureaucratic sophistication. The Sultan commanded the army and made key political decisions, but day-to-day governance relied heavily on Persian viziers and officials who managed taxation, correspondence, and law. Among the most significant figures to emerge during this time was Abul Qasim, Tughril's early vizier, who helped establish the structures of Seljuk administration. He was later succeeded by more capable and ambitious statesmen, culminating in the rise of Nizam al-Mulk under Tughril's successor. But even at this early stage, the outlines of Seljuk governance were becoming clear. The army would be drawn mainly from Turkic tribes, while the bureaucracy and scholarship would be Persian. This balance of cultures became one of the empire's greatest strengths and one of its defining legacies. Tughril's conquests also brought him into contact with the Abbasid Caliphate. Though the caliph still resided in Baghdad, his authority had long been overshadowed by the Buyid emirs. The Abbasid caliphs had once ruled from Spain to Central Asia, but by Tughril's time, their realm had shrunk to a spiritual office with little real power. Yet, despite their weakness, the Abbasids remained the ultimate source of legitimacy in the Islamic world. A ruler who could claim the caliph's recognition would not only control land but command faith. Tughril understood this better than anyone. By the mid-1050s, Tughril's armies had pushed deep into western Iran, bringing him to the doorstep of Iraq. The Buyids, weakened by internal divisions and popular discontent, were unable to resist effectively. In the year 1055, Tughril marched on Baghdad. The city, long a symbol of both Islamic unity and political decline, welcomed him with a mixture of relief and apprehension. The Caliph al-Qaim, who had endured Buyid domination for decades, saw in Tughril a chance to restore Sunni authority. When Tughril entered Baghdad, it marked a moment of profound transformation in the Islamic world. The Caliph publicly recognized him as Sultan and Protector of the Faith, a title that fused temporal power with religious duty. In return, Tughril swore allegiance to the Caliph, promising to defend Sunni Islam and maintain order. This alliance between the Seljuks and the Abbasids reshaped the balance of power in the Middle East. For the first time in centuries, a strong Sunni ruler stood as the political guardian of the caliphate. The symbolism of Tughril's entrance into Baghdad cannot be overstated. It represented not only the triumph of the Seljuks, but the revival of Sunni Islam as a political force. The nomadic Turks who had once been outsiders were now the defenders of the faith's most sacred institution. From this moment onward, the Seljuk sultans would claim to rule in the name of the caliph, wielding both the sword and the legitimacy of religion. Yet the task of governing such a vast and diverse realm was not simple. The Seljuks had to balance the interests of their Turkic tribal base with the expectations of the Persian urban elite and the spiritual authority of the caliphate. Tughril's leadership relied on diplomacy as much as force. He rewarded loyal commanders with ikta lands, temporary grants of revenue in exchange for military service, while ensuring that key cities remained under direct control of trusted administrators. This system, refined by later rulers, became a cornerstone of Seljuk governance and a model for future Islamic empires. Tughril also faced challenges from within his own family. the very structure that had once united the Seljuks, a network of related princes governing different regions, now threatened to pull the empire apart. Tughrul's nephews and cousins, ambitious and independent, often clashed over territory and authority. To manage this, Tughrul pursued a policy of strategic marriages and power sharing, granting governorships to relatives while maintaining ultimate authority as sultan. His ability to navigate these internal rivalries without descending into civil war was a testament to his political skill. Culturally, the early Seljuk period witnessed a remarkable revival of Persian language and identity within an Islamic framework. Court poets, historians, and theologians flourished under Seljuk patronage. Persian once again became the language of administration and high culture, blending Turkic vigor with Persian refinement. This cultural synthesis gave rise to what historians later called the Persianate civilization, a fusion that would dominate Islamic Asia for centuries, influencing art, literature, architecture, and governance from Anatolia to India. One of the defining features of Tughrul's reign was his cautious but firm approach to religious policy. Unlike some of his predecessors or rivals, Tughrul did not impose religious uniformity by force. Instead, he worked to strengthen Sunni institutions while tolerating local diversity where it did not threaten stability. He funded mosques, madrasas, and scholars, laying the groundwork for what would later become the Seljuk Sunni revival. This policy won him widespread respect among the ulama, or religious scholars, whose endorsement further legitimized his rule. When Tughrul Beg passed away without a direct heir, the future of the Seljuk Empire rested uncertainly on the shoulders of his nephew, Alp Arslan, the son of Chagri Beg. The dynasty had grown rapidly in both territory and prestige, but it was still young, and the balance between its Turkic tribal roots and its new Persian Islamic structure remained delicate. The question was whether this new ruler could maintain unity, defend what had been gained, and continue to expand the empire's influence without fracturing it. Alp Arslan, whose name meant heroic lion, proved to be the kind of leader the Seljuk state needed at precisely this moment. He inherited not just an empire, but a mission: to consolidate Seljuk rule and to carry the banner of Sunni Islam westward into lands still under Byzantine control. His reign would combine military brilliance, religious legitimacy, and the administrative guidance of one of the greatest viziers in Islamic history, Nizam al-Mulk. Together, they would lead the Seljuk Empire into its golden age. Upon his accession in the early 1060s, Alp Arslan faced immediate challenges. His claim to power was contested by rival members of the Seljuk family, including his uncle Kutalmish, who believed he had a stronger right to the throne as Tughrul's cousin. This internal conflict threatened to split the empire just as it was achieving stability. The two forces met in battle near Ray, the imperial capital in northern Iran. Alp Arslan's victory in this confrontation not only eliminated a dangerous rival, but also demonstrated his leadership to both his Turkic warriors and the Persian bureaucratic class. With Kutalmish defeated and unity restored, Alp Arslan could turn his attention to strengthening the state. At the heart of his administration stood Nizam al-Mulk, an extraordinarily capable statesman whose vision would leave a permanent mark on Islamic governance. Nizam al-Mulk, whose name meant Order of the Realm, became the empire's vizier and chief architect of its bureaucracy. He believed that an empire could not survive on military strength alone. It required institutions, education, and justice. Under his supervision, the Seljuks developed a sophisticated system of administration that balanced tribal autonomy with centralized authority. One of Nizam al-Mulk's most important innovations was the founding of the Nizamiya madrasas, institutions of higher learning that spread throughout the Seljuk territories. These schools were dedicated to Sunni scholarship, particularly the Shafi'i and Hanafi traditions of law, and were designed to counter the influence of Shia movements such as the Ismailis and Fatimids. The madrasas not only trained scholars and jurists, but also fostered a sense of unity across the empire by promoting a shared Sunni identity. Through education and patronage, the Seljuks became champions of what historians would later call the Sunni revival. While Nizam al-Mulk managed the internal stability of the empire, Alp Arslan focused on external expansion. The new sultan was both a warrior and a strategist. He understood that the Seljuk Empire's future lay not only in consolidating Persia, but also in extending its reach into the Caucasus and Anatolia, regions contested by the Christian Byzantine Empire and various Armenian and Georgian principalities. These frontiers offered both danger and opportunity. Alp Arslan first turned his attention to the east, ensuring that his rear was secure before marching west. He led successful campaigns against rebellious provinces in Central Asia and subdued local emirs who refused Seljuk authority. Once the east was pacified, he directed his attention to the northwest frontier. His goal was not immediate conquest, but the creation of a protective belt of vassal states and military colonies that could serve as a buffer against Byzantine and nomadic threats. In the early 1066s, Alp Arslan marched into the Caucasus, leading his forces across Armenia and Georgia. These campaigns demonstrated the mobility and discipline of the Seljuk cavalry, whose tactics of rapid strikes and feigned retreats proved devastating against more heavily armed opponents. The Seljuks captured key fortresses, secured mountain passes, and forced local rulers to acknowledge Seljuk suzerainty. These victories not only extended the empire's borders but also opened new routes into eastern Anatolia. The Byzantine Empire, long accustomed to being the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean, now faced a new and unpredictable rival. In Constantinople, Emperor Romanos IV Diogenes had recently taken the throne. Determined to restore Byzantine prestige, he embarked on an ambitious military campaign to reclaim lost territory in Asia Minor and to push back against the Seljuk advance. The two powers were now on a collision course that neither could avoid. While the Byzantines prepared for war, Alp Arslan's attention was temporarily drawn southward. In the Levant, the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt still posed a major religious and political rival to Sunni dominance. The Fatimids supported Shia doctrines and sought to extend their influence across Syria and the Arabian Peninsula. To counter them, Alp Arslan dispatched expeditions into northern Syria, capturing Aleppo and establishing Seljuk authority over parts of the region. This expansion also brought the Seljuks into contact with the Arab dynasties of Mosul and Aleppo, paving the way for later Seljuk involvement in Syria and Iraq. By the late 1060s, Alp Arslan's empire stretched from the Oxus River in Central Asia to the borders of the Byzantine world. Yet the Sultan knew that maintaining such vast dominion required more than conquest. It demanded religious and political legitimacy. His close alliance with the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad gave him the authority to act as the defender of Sunni Islam, a role that both united his subjects and justified his wars. The defining moment of Alp Arslan's reign came in the year 1071, when his forces confronted the Byzantine army at the Battle of Manzikert in eastern Anatolia. The campaign began as a strategic maneuver to secure the frontier, but it quickly escalated into a full-scale confrontation between two great empires. Emperor Romanos led a large and well-equipped army composed of Byzantine regulars, mercenaries, and allied contingents. Alp Arslan's forces, though smaller, were highly mobile and better adapted to the terrain. Before the battle, Alp Arslan is reported to have addressed his troops with words that would echo through history. "If I die, bury me here. If we win, it will be by God's will." Then he dressed in white robes, symbolizing readiness for death, and led his men into combat. The battle unfolded on the plains near the town of Manzikert. The Byzantines initially advanced in good order, but miscommunication and the desertion of some allied troops threw their ranks into confusion. The Seljuks exploited this chaos with precision. Using their trademark hit-and-run tactics, they encircled the Byzantine army, firing volleys of arrows before closing in for direct engagement. As the sun set, the Byzantine lines broke, and Emperor Romanos himself was captured. The outcome was decisive. The Byzantine army was shattered, and Anatolia, once the empire's heartland, was left exposed to Turkish settlement. The capture of the Byzantine emperor was a moment of extraordinary significance. Alp Arslan treated Romanos with unexpected dignity, reportedly saying, "What would you have done if I had been brought before you as a prisoner?" The emperor replied, "Perhaps I would have killed you." To which Alp Arslan answered, "My punishment is heavier, I forgive you." This exchange, recorded by both Islamic and Byzantine chroniclers, illustrates the Sultan's blend of magnanimity and authority. The consequences of Manzikert were profound and far-reaching. Although Alp Arslan released the emperor and sought peace, the political fallout in Constantinople was disastrous. Romanos was deposed, and civil wars weakened Byzantine control over Anatolia. In the ensuing years, waves of Turkic tribes, many of them Seljuk allies or dependents, poured into the region. The foundations of the Sultanate of Rum, an independent Seljuk state in Anatolia, were laid in the wake of this victory. For the Seljuks, Manzikert symbolized more than military triumph. It represented a civilizational shift. It opened Anatolia to Islamic influence, creating a new frontier of cultural exchange between the Islamic and Christian worlds. Over the following centuries, Anatolia would transform from a Byzantine province into the heartland of Turkish Islamic civilization, setting the stage for later powers such as the Ottomans. After the battle, Alp Arslan returned eastward, leaving the administration of newly conquered regions to trusted commanders. His focus turned again to Central Asia, where he sought to secure the empire's borders against nomadic incursions. However, his reign was cut short. While campaigning in Transoxiana against a rebellious vassal, Alp Arslan was fatally wounded in a skirmish. His death in 1072 brought an abrupt end to one of the most dynamic reigns in Seljuk history. The Battle of Manzikert in the summer of 1071 had changed the destiny of empires. It was not merely a victory on a distant plain, it was a civilizational turning point. The Seljuks, under Sultan Alp Arslan, had captured the Byzantine emperor Romanos IV Diogenes, and in doing so had shaken the foundations of one of the most enduring states in the medieval world. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire had guarded the eastern gates of Europe against the world beyond. Now, that gate stood wide open, and through it would pour new peoples, new faiths, and a new balance of power that would transform the map of the Middle East and Anatolia forever. When Alp Arslan returned east after Manzikert, his intention was not to dismantle Byzantium but to secure peace and stability on his western frontier. He had treated Emperor Romanos with clemency, hoping to turn the captured ruler into a valuable ally. Yet, events soon slipped beyond his control. Romanos was overthrown upon his return to Constantinople, blinded and cast aside by his political rivals. The Byzantine Empire entered a period of internal chaos. Civil wars erupted between generals and claimants to the throne, weakening the empire's hold on its eastern provinces. This power vacuum was precisely what allowed the Turks to move into Anatolia, not as invaders under a single banner, but as a wave of independent groups, tribal confederations, and military commanders seeking fortune and land. The Seljuk victory had broken the psychological barrier that had long separated the Muslim East from the Christian West of Asia Minor. The frontier that had once seemed impenetrable now appeared open and undefended. In the years that followed, thousands of Turkic warriors, many from the Oghuz and other nomadic tribes, began migrating into Anatolia. They were not all under the direct control of the Great Seljuk Sultanate. Rather, they moved as semi-independent bands led by local chiefs. These warriors brought their families, their flocks, and their faith, settling across the plateaus and valleys of central and eastern Anatolia. The process was gradual but unstoppable. Towns and villages that had once been part of the Byzantine world were now absorbed into a new cultural and political landscape. The Seljuk leadership, though focused on the heartlands of Iran and Iraq, recognized the strategic significance of these Western movements. Alp Arslan's successors, particularly his son Malik Shah, saw the migration into Anatolia as an opportunity to expand the influence of Islam and extend Seljuk protection across the frontier. To manage this expansion, the Seljuk sultans began granting autonomy to trusted commanders who could establish order in the newly acquired territories. One of these commanders, Süleyman ibn Kutalmış, a cousin of Alp Arslan, would play a decisive role in shaping the destiny of Anatolia. Süleyman ibn Kutalmış had earlier rebelled against Alp Arslan's authority, but was later reconciled with the dynasty. After the chaos that followed Manzikert, he led his forces into western Anatolia, capitalizing on the disintegration of Byzantine control. By the mid-1070s, he had captured key cities such as Nicaea and established his capital there. From this base, Suleiman founded what would later be known as the Sultanate of Rum, named after Rum, the Arabic term for the lands of the Romans, that is, Byzantium. The creation of the Sultanate of Rum marked a new chapter in Islamic and Turkish history. For the first time, a stable Muslim polity was established in Anatolia, blending the nomadic traditions of the steppe with the urban and agricultural heritage of the Byzantine provinces. The new sultanate became a bridge between worlds, between Central Asia and the Mediterranean, between Turkic warriors and Greek farmers, between Islam and the legacy of the classical world. The early years of the Sultanate of Rum were marked by both opportunity and challenge. Suleiman faced the difficult task of uniting diverse peoples and cultures under a single political system. The local Greek and Armenian populations, accustomed to Byzantine rule, were often pragmatic in adapting to their new governors. In many cases, they found the Seljuk administration less burdensome than that of the crumbling Byzantine bureaucracy. The Seljuks, for their part, maintained much of the existing taxation and land systems, relying on local officials to manage daily affairs. Religious policy was similarly pragmatic. While Islam became the official faith, Christians and Jews were allowed to continue their worship in exchange for the traditional jizya tax. Mosques began to appear alongside churches, and Arabic and Persian inscriptions began to mingle with Greek and Armenian ones. The Turks, though newcomers, were not simply conquerors. They were settlers, administrators, and eventually patrons of architecture, art, and trade. The establishment of the Sultanate of Rum also had profound implications for the great Seljuk Empire itself. Under Malik Shah, the empire's vast territories stretched from the Oxus River to the Mediterranean, and the emergence of the Anatolian branch extended Seljuk influence to the very edge of Europe. The relationship between the great Seljuks and their Anatolian counterparts was one of loose suzerainty. The Sultan of Rum recognized the authority of the great Sultan but ruled independently in practice. This arrangement allowed for local flexibility while maintaining a sense of shared identity and purpose. The settlement of the Turks in Anatolia also transformed the demographic and cultural composition of the region. Within a few decades, Turkic language and customs began to blend with local traditions, giving rise to what would eventually become the Turkish identity. Villages adopted Turkish names, nomadic encampments evolved into permanent towns, and Sufi mystics and scholars carried Islamic learning into rural communities. This process of Turkification and Islamization was not sudden, but unfolded organically over generations, driven by migration, intermarriage, and shared economic life. At the same time, the Byzantine Empire's attempts to reclaim its lost territories met with limited success. Although individual generals launched counteroffensives, the internal strife in Constantinople prevented any sustained effort. The empire's energies were consumed by court intrigue and succession disputes. For the Byzantine leadership, the loss of Anatolia was not just a military defeat. It was a spiritual and economic catastrophe. Anatolia had been the empire's breadbasket and its main source of manpower. Without it, Byzantium's strength was permanently diminished. The weakening of Byzantium and the establishment of the Sultanate of Rum also reshaped the geopolitics of the entire eastern Mediterranean. The routes that connected Constantinople, Aleppo, and Baghdad now passed through territories under Seljuk control. Caravans, scholars, and artisans traveled these routes, bringing with them goods, ideas, and artistic influences. The Seljuks' presence revitalized trade and encouraged urban growth across Anatolia. Cities such as Konya, Kayseri, and Sivas would, in the decades to come, become centers of learning and architecture. Culturally, the early Sultanate of Rum became a meeting ground for traditions from East and West. Persian remained the language of administration and poetry, while Arabic dominated religious and scholarly life. Over time, however, Turkish began to emerge as a spoken language of daily life and eventually of literature. The combination of Turkic vigor, Persian sophistication, and Byzantine urban culture created a unique civilization that would later flourish under the Ottomans. One of the most important outcomes of this new Seljuk presence in Anatolia was the shifting relationship between Islam and Christendom. The sudden loss of so much territory alarmed Christian Europe. Reports of the Turkish advance reached the courts and monasteries of the Latin West, fueling anxiety and religious fervor. Within a few decades, these fears would lead to the launching of the First Crusade. Though that event lay just beyond the horizon of this period, the seeds of the Crusades were planted in the aftermath of Manzikert and the rapid expansion of Seljuk power. Within the Great Seljuk Empire, the westward expansion also required careful coordination. Malik Shah, who succeeded Alp Arslan after his father's death, maintained correspondence with his cousin Suleiman ibn Kutalmish, recognizing his rule over Anatolia, while ensuring that the new sultanate remained aligned with Seljuk policies. Malik Shah's reign was marked by prosperity and order, allowing the empire to support and sustain its Anatolian frontier through both diplomacy and commerce. As the decade after Manzikert came to a close, the transformation of Anatolia was well underway. What had once been a frontier zone of the Byzantine world was becoming the western pillar of the Islamic realm. Turkish settlements stretched from the Euphrates to the Aegean, and the foundations of new cities and caravan routes were being laid. The frontier that Alp Arslan had opened with his sword was now being stabilized by the labors of settlers, administrators, and scholars. The death of Alp Arslan and the accession of his son Malik Shah marked not merely the succession of one ruler by another, but the arrival of a new phase in Seljuk history, a period defined not by conquest, but by consolidation, organization, and intellectual flowering. Under Sultan Malik Shah and his legendary vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, the Seljuk Empire evolved from a loose confederation of tribes into a sophisticated imperial system. It became a state guided by law, bureaucracy, and learning, a polity that stood as the central pillar of the Islamic world during the 11th century. The young Sultan Malik Shah inherited an empire that stretched from the Oxus River in the east to the gates of Anatolia in the west. The challenge before him was monumental: how to govern a vast and diverse dominion composed of nomadic Turks, urban Persians, Arabs, and newly settled Anatolian communities. The task required not only strength and intelligence, but a vision that could bind together the many peoples and traditions under Seljuk rule. Malik Shah possessed both the temperament and the patience for this task, but it was his vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, who gave the Seljuk Empire its enduring structure. Nizam al-Mulk, whose full name was Abu Ali Hassan ibn Ali Tusi, was not a warrior, but a statesman and scholar of exceptional ability. Born in the Persian city of Tus, he had served under Alp Arslan and had already demonstrated his brilliance in administration and diplomacy. As vizier to Malik Shah, he became the empire's chief architect, overseeing everything from tax collection to education and judicial reform. His vision was codified in his celebrated treatise, the Siyasatnama, or Book of Government, which outlined the principles of good governance, justice, and the moral duties of a ruler. At the core of Nizam al-Mulk's philosophy was the belief that an empire could survive only if it balanced power with justice. He argued that a sultan must be both strong and righteous, guided by religious law but supported by competent administrators. This belief shaped the administrative system of the Seljuks. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by officials appointed from the central court. Tax revenues were managed through the ikta system, whereby land revenues were granted to military officers or nobles in exchange for service. Unlike simple feudalism, this system maintained imperial control while rewarding loyalty and merit. To ensure effective communication and oversight, Nizam al-Mulk established an elaborate network of couriers and inspectors. Reports from distant provinces reached the capital with remarkable speed, allowing the Sultan to monitor both military and civilian affairs. Corruption, though inevitable in any large state, was kept in check through a mixture of surveillance, audits, and moral expectation. The vizier's administrative reforms created stability across the empire, allowing trade, agriculture, and scholarship to flourish. Equally transformative was Nizam al-Mulk's investment in education and religious life. He recognized that political unity could not endure without intellectual and spiritual cohesion. During the 11th century, the Islamic world was divided by sectarian rivalries, particularly between Sunni and Shia factions. The Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, following Shia Ismaili doctrines, posed both a religious and political challenge to Sunni Islam. To counter this influence, Nizam al-Mulk launched one of the most ambitious educational programs in medieval history, the founding of the Nizamiya madrasas. These madrasas, or colleges, were established in major cities such as Baghdad, Nishapur, Merv, and Isfahan. They served as centers of Sunni scholarship and training for the next generation of administrators, judges, and theologians. The curriculum emphasized the Quran, Hadith, and Sunni jurisprudence, particularly the Shafi'i and Hanafi schools of law. But beyond religious instruction, the madrasas also taught mathematics, philosophy, and literature. They were open to students of talent regardless of social background, and many received stipends for study. The Nizamiya network not only strengthened Sunni orthodoxy, but also gave the Seljuk state an educated bureaucracy loyal to its ideals. It created a class of scholars, the ulama, who acted as intermediaries between the Sultan and the people, ensuring that the empire's policies aligned with Islamic principles. The partnership between the political and religious elites under Malik Shah's reign provided the empire with both legitimacy and moral authority. Meanwhile, the Seljuk court at Isfahan emerged as one of the great centers of culture and learning in the medieval world. Malik Shah, though a military ruler, had a deep appreciation for scholarship, art, and science. His reign witnessed remarkable intellectual achievements, including the construction of observatories and the advancement of astronomy and mathematics. The famous poet and mathematician Omar Khayyam, best known for his later Rubaiyat, was among those patronized by the Seljuk court. Under Malik Shah's direction, Khayyam and a team of scholars reformed the Persian calendar, creating the Jalali calendar, whose precision surpassed that of the Julian calendar used in Europe. This flourishing of knowledge was not accidental. It was a reflection of the stability and wealth that the Seljuk administration had achieved. With trade routes secure and provincial governance efficient, merchants, scholars, and artisans moved freely across the empire. Caravans traveled from Samarkand to Baghdad, carrying silk, spices, and books. The Seljuk territories became a conduit for cultural exchange between East and West, linking the Islamic world with Byzantium, India, and China. Yet even as the Seljuk Empire reached new heights of prosperity, it also faced challenges that revealed the fragility of its structure. Among the most dangerous of these was the rise of the Nizari Ismailis, a militant Shia sect that rejected both Sunni orthodoxy and Seljuk authority. Led by Hassani Saba, the Nizaris established a network of fortresses across Persia and Syria, the most famous of which was Alamut, a stronghold perched high in the mountains north of Qazvin. From these mountain fortresses, the Nizaris launched a campaign of political assassinations against Seljuk officials, scholars, and military leaders. Their operatives, known in Western sources as the assassins, relied not on armies, but on stealth, infiltration, and fear. Their goal was to destabilize the Sunni establishment that Nizam al-Mulk and the Seljuks represented. The conflict between the Seljuk state and the Ismailis became one of the most dramatic episodes of the 11th century, symbolizing the deep religious and political divisions within the Muslim world. Nizam al-Mulk himself would eventually fall victim to this shadow war. In the year 1092, while accompanying Malik Shah on a journey, he was attacked and fatally wounded by an Ismaili agent disguised as a Sufi dervish. His death marked the end of an era of order and wisdom in Seljuk administration. The vizier's assassination was not only a personal tragedy, but also a symbolic blow to the empire's intellectual and moral foundation. In the years before his death, however, Nizam al-Mulk had left behind an enduring legacy. His Siyasatnama continued to be read by rulers and scholars for centuries, influencing Islamic political thought from Persia to India. His educational institutions survived the decline of the Seljuks and became models for later madrasas under the Ayyubids, Mamluks, and Ottomans. More than any single conquest, Nizam al-Mulk's vision gave the Seljuk Empire its soul, a balance of faith, intellect, and administration. Under Malik Shah, the Seljuk Empire reached its greatest territorial extent, from Central Asia to the Mediterranean. From the Caspian Sea to the Arabian Peninsula, the empire encompassed nearly all of the Islamic heartlands. The Sultan ruled over Persians, Turks, Arabs, Kurds, Armenians, and Greeks, a mosaic of peoples unified by a shared political order and the banner of Sunni Islam. Malik Shah's reign was characterized by tolerance and pragmatism. Local autonomy was respected, and provincial governors were often drawn from among the native elites. This inclusive approach helped sustain peace across diverse regions. The prosperity of the age was visible not only in its scholarship, but also in its architecture. The Seljuks invested in monumental building projects, mosques, caravanserais, and madrasas that expressed both imperial authority and religious devotion. The use of brickwork and geometric ornamentation in Seljuk architecture would later influence Persian and Anatolian styles. Cities such as Isfahan and Nishapur became showcases of Islamic urbanism with their wide bazaars, gardens, and domed mosques. Despite these achievements, Malik Shah's later years were shadowed by tension. The balance that Nizam al-Mulk had so carefully maintained began to fray as competing factions at court sought influence. Family disputes over succession, provincial rivalries, and the growing assertiveness of local atabegs hinted at future instability. Malik Shah, though wise and capable, could not entirely suppress the centrifugal forces that threatened to pull the vast empire apart. When Alp Arslan's son, Malik Shah I, took the throne, the Seljuk Empire entered its most glorious and influential era. His reign was one of harmony, prosperity, and vision, a time when the power of the Seljuks was unmatched across the Islamic world. Yet, beneath the golden surface of achievement, tensions were already forming, tensions that would later determine the empire's fate. Malik Shah inherited an empire that was already vast, stretching from the steppes of Central Asia to the mountains of Anatolia, and from the Persian Gulf to the borders of the Byzantine Empire. But the Sultan did more than merely maintain these territories. He transformed them into a realm that functioned as a true empire, stable, organized, and intellectually alive. Under his leadership, the Seljuks reached their political, cultural, and economic peak. The young Sultan was barely in his 20s when he assumed power after the death of his father in the year 1072. His succession was not uncontested. Rivals within the Seljuk family, including his uncle Kavurt, the governor of Kerman, challenged his claim. The resulting civil war tested Malik Shah's resolve at the very start of his reign. The Sultan's forces, led by experienced generals and guided by the steady hand of his vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, triumphed over the rebellion. Kavurt was captured and executed, a decision that, though difficult, secured Malik Shah's authority and prevented the fragmentation of the empire. With unity restored, Malik Shah and Nizam al-Mulk set out to refine and strengthen what their predecessors had built. Their partnership was one of the most remarkable in medieval history. Malik Shah, though a warrior by lineage, was a man of learning and moderation. Nizam al-Mulk, already a seasoned administrator, provided the intellectual and structural framework that made the empire run efficiently. Together, they embodied the ideal of the sword and the pen, a union of military might and wise governance. One of the first priorities of their administration was to secure the empire's frontiers. The Seljuk domains bordered numerous rivals: the Ghaznavids in the east, the Fatimids in the south, and the Byzantines in the west. Malik Shah delegated authority to trusted generals and family members to oversee these distant regions. His brother Tutush was appointed governor of Syria, establishing a Seljuk presence in the Levant that would later become crucial during the Crusades. His cousin Suleiman ibn Kutalmish ruled in Anatolia as the founder of the Sultanate of Rum, acknowledging Malik Shah's supremacy while governing independently. This decentralization of power through loyal kin and commanders allowed the empire to cover immense territory without losing cohesion. Yet it also planted the seeds of future fragmentation. Each regional ruler held authority in his own domain, and local loyalties sometimes outweighed allegiance to the distant sultan in Isfahan. While securing the empire externally, Malik Shah focused on building its internal strength. Under his rule, the capital city of Isfahan flourished into one of the greatest urban centers of the medieval Islamic world. The Sultan invested heavily in architecture, irrigation, and public works. Grand mosques, caravanserais, bridges, and gardens adorned the landscape, symbolizing both the wealth of the empire and the Sultan's commitment to public welfare. The Great Mosque of Isfahan, expanded and beautified under Malik Shah's patronage, became a masterpiece of Seljuk architecture. Its vast courtyard, 4 monumental iwans, and intricate geometric ornamentation reflected the aesthetic and spiritual values of the age. The Seljuk architectural style, marked by pointed arches, elaborate brickwork, and grand domes, would influence Islamic design for centuries, eventually shaping the mosques of Anatolia and even the monuments of the later Ottoman Empire. Economically, the empire thrived. Trade routes from China, India, and the Mediterranean converged under Seljuk protection. Caravans crossed the deserts and mountains safely, transporting silk, spices, gems, and manuscripts. Malik Shah's administration improved road systems and established a network of caravanserais, fortified inns that offered shelter and security to travelers. These measures not only boosted commerce but also symbolized the Seljuks' role as guardians of civilization between East and West. Culturally, Malik Shah's reign was an age of enlightenment. His court attracted scholars, poets, scientists, and philosophers from across the Islamic world. Persian became the language of administration and literature, while Arabic remained the language of religion and science. This bilingual culture encouraged intellectual exchange and produced lasting works in philosophy, astronomy, and mathematics. Among the most distinguished figures at Malik Shah's court was the poet, philosopher, and mathematician Omar Khayyam. Under royal patronage, Khayyam and a group of scholars conducted astronomical studies that led to the reform of the Persian calendar. Their creation, known as the Jalali calendar, was so accurate that it surpassed the Gregorian calendar introduced centuries later in Europe. The Jalali calendar reflected the Seljuks' blend of faith and reason, their belief that understanding God's creation through science was a form of devotion. Malik Shah also encouraged the compilation of geographical and historical works. Scholars were commissioned to map the empire, record its cities, and preserve the histories of its people. Libraries and observatories were built in major cities, and scholars exchanged ideas across the empire's vast network of madrasas. Under Nizam al-Mulk's supervision, these institutions provided free education, spreading knowledge and reinforcing Sunni orthodoxy. The Nizamiya madrasas, now fully developed across the empire, played an essential role in uniting its intellectual life. They produced generations of jurists, theologians, and administrators who upheld the ideals of justice and order. This integration of religious learning with state service ensured that Seljuk governance remained rooted in Islamic legitimacy. It also provided the empire with a unifying ideology at a time when sectarian divisions threatened the broader Muslim world. Religiously, Malik Shah's reign is often described as the height of the Sunni revival. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, though politically subordinate to the Seljuks, enjoyed renewed prestige under Seljuk protection. The Sultan upheld the caliph's symbolic authority, presenting himself as the caliph's defender and executor of divine law. This relationship gave the empire both spiritual legitimacy and political stability. However, not all forces within the Islamic world welcomed the Seljuk dominance. The Nizari Ismailis, led by Hassani Sabah, continued their campaign against the empire from their mountain strongholds. Their assassins targeted Seljuk officials, scholars, and military leaders, spreading fear across Persia and Syria. Despite Malik Shah's efforts to suppress them, the Ismailis remained an enduring menace, representing both a political and ideological challenge to Seljuk authority. While the empire prospered outwardly, subtle tensions simmered within. The vastness of the Seljuk domains meant that local rulers and atabegs, military guardians appointed to oversee provinces, gained increasing autonomy. In Syria, Tutush ruled with near independence. In Anatolia, the Sultanate of Rum followed its own course. In Khorasan and Transoxiana, local governors began to act as semi-independent princes. Malik Shah managed these relationships through diplomacy and marriage alliances, but the underlying centrifugal forces would later resurface after his death. Toward the end of his reign, Malik Shah also faced personal and dynastic troubles. The death of his trusted vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, in 1092 was a devastating blow. The vizier's assassination by an Ismaili agent not only deprived the empire of its greatest administrator, but also disrupted the balance of power at court. Rival factions, including members of the royal family and ambitious courtiers, vied for influence. Malik Shah, grieving and burdened by illness, found himself increasingly isolated. That same year, the Sultan himself died suddenly, under circumstances that remain debated by historians. Some accounts suggest natural causes, others hint at poisoning or conspiracy. Whatever the truth, his death in 1992 marked the end of the empire's golden age. Within weeks, the great structure that he and Nizam al-Mulk had built began to show cracks. Malik Shah's death created a power vacuum that the Seljuk system, so dependent on strong leadership, could not easily fill. His sons and relatives quarreled over succession, while local rulers seized the opportunity to assert independence. The Abbasid Caliph, freed from Seljuk oversight, cautiously reasserted his autonomy. Meanwhile, in the western provinces, new challenges were on the horizon. For the people of the Islamic world, the passing of Malik Shah felt like the end of an era. Chroniclers remembered his reign as a time of justice, abundance, and intellectual brilliance. Later poets would recall him as the King of Kings, a ruler whose domain stretched from the borders of China to the shores of the Mediterranean. Under his banner, the Seljuks had united the Muslim world in a way not seen since the early caliphs. Yet even in this height of power lay the seeds of decline, fragmentation, ambition, and the dependence on personal authority that could not easily be replaced. The death of Sultan Malik Shah I in the year 1092 marked a turning point in the history of the Seljuk Empire. What had been the most powerful and orderly state in the Islamic world began to fracture under the weight of dynastic rivalries, local ambitions, and external threats. Within a single generation, the empire that had stretched from the Oxus to the Mediterranean would be divided among competing princes, and the unity that had defined the Seljuk Golden Age would be lost. The collapse did not come overnight, but the signs of disintegration appeared immediately. Malik Shah had ruled with such authority that his personal leadership had been the glue binding together a vast and diverse dominion. Once he was gone, the question of succession ignited fierce conflict. His eldest son, Barkiyaruk, was declared Sultan in Isfahan, but his claim was challenged by his stepmother, Turkin Khatun, who sought the throne for her young son, Mahmud. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, ever cautious of Seljuk dominance, sided with Barkiyaruk, seeing in him a ruler less likely to threaten caliphal authority. The empire thus descended into civil war. Barkiyaruk's supporters, composed mainly of Turkic commanders and traditional military elites, faced the faction loyal to Turkin Khatun and her Persian bureaucratic allies. The conflict dragged on for years, devastating Persia and weakening central control. Provinces that had once sent taxes and troops to Isfahan began to operate independently. In Khorasan, Malik Shah's brother, Sanjar, established himself as de facto ruler. In Syria, Tutush and his sons carved out their own domains, while in Anatolia, the Sultanate of Rum continued to evolve separately. The loss of unity within the Seljuk dynasty coincided with an event that would shake the entire Islamic world: the arrival of the Crusaders from Europe. The timing could not have been worse. As the Seljuks fought one another, they were unprepared to face an external enemy of such determination and scale. The origins of the First Crusade lay far to the west, in the councils and cathedrals of Europe. Reports of the Seljuk conquests in Anatolia and the capture of Jerusalem by Muslim rulers had alarmed Christian leaders. The Byzantine emperor Alexios Komnenos, desperate to recover lost territory and to secure his empire from Turkish incursions, sent envoys to Pope Urban II requesting military assistance. The Pope's response in the year 1095 was far more ambitious than a simple alliance. He called upon the knights and peoples of Christendom to march east, not only to aid Byzantium, but to liberate the Holy Land from Muslim control. The call to arms electrified Europe. Thousands of nobles, knights, and peasants took up the cross, setting forth on a campaign that combined religious zeal, adventure, and material ambition. By the time they reached the Middle East, the Crusaders were a force unlike anything the Seljuks had ever encountered. A coalition of Western Europeans united by faith and ideology. At that moment, the Seljuk world was divided into several competing states. In Syria, Tutush had died, leaving his sons Ridwan in Aleppo and Dukak in Damascus, whose rivalry paralyzed Muslim defense. In Iraq and Persia, Barkiyaruk struggled against his brother Muhammad Tapar for control of the central Seljuk throne. In Anatolia, the Sultanate of Rum faced its own pressures, still consolidating its power amid Byzantine resistance. What had once been a single empire was now a collection of semi-independent principalities, each too preoccupied with its own survival to coordinate against the invaders. When the Crusaders first appeared in the Levant, their arrival was met with confusion rather than unity. The local Muslim rulers underestimated their strength, assuming they were just another band of mercenaries or pilgrims. But the Crusaders were disciplined, motivated, and driven by a powerful sense of divine mission. In 1997, they captured Antioch after a brutal siege, and 2 years later, Jerusalem fell to their armies. The massacre that followed shocked the Muslim world. Tens of thousands of inhabitants, both Muslims and Jews, were killed. The fall of Jerusalem was more than a military disaster. It was a spiritual humiliation for Islam. The city held profound religious significance, being home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, sacred sites in Islamic tradition. For the first time since the early Islamic conquests, Christians once again controlled one of the holiest cities of the faith. The disunity of the Seljuks was largely to blame for the catastrophe. The various Seljuk princes, preoccupied with their own disputes, failed to present a united defense. Even when the danger became clear, cooperation proved nearly impossible. Ridwan of Aleppo and Dukak of Damascus distrusted each other more than they feared the Crusaders. The Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad, though alarmed, had little direct power to intervene. The collapse of Seljuk unity during this period also exposed deeper structural weaknesses within the empire. The Iqta system, which had been designed to sustain the military and maintain provincial loyalty, began to break down as regional commanders turned their lands into personal estates. Tribal groups that had once served the central government now acted independently, collecting taxes and maintaining private armies. The result was a patchwork of competing interests, all nominally loyal to the Seljuk name, but practically autonomous. Despite the general chaos, a few leaders emerged who sought to restore order. Among them was Muhammad Tapar, one of Malik Shah's younger sons. Through a combination of military skill and political maneuvering, he managed to defeat his rival Barkiyaruk and reunify much of the empire under his rule by the early 12th century. However, Even Muhammad's authority was limited. The Syrian and Anatolian branches of the Seljuks remained independent, and Khorasan continued to be ruled by Sanjar, who would later become the last great Seljuk sultan. Meanwhile, the arrival of the Crusaders had lasting consequences beyond the immediate losses. The establishment of Crusader states in Jerusalem, Antioch, and Edessa created a permanent Western presence in the Levant. The Islamic world, fragmented and weary, was slow to mount an effective response. Yet, the sense of humiliation and outrage that followed the loss of Jerusalem would, in time, inspire a new wave of leaders, men such as Imad al-Din Zengi and Salah al-Din al-Ayyubi, who would later reclaim the Holy Land. The early 12th century also witnessed growing instability in the Seljuk heartlands. The capital at Isfahan suffered from riots, economic decline, and the constant movement of armies between rival claimants. Even the great intellectual centers established under Malik Shah began to lose their prominence. Scholars and artisans fled to provincial courts where patronage was still available, such as those of the Atabegs in Mosul and Aleppo. Amid this political fragmentation, cultural and intellectual life did not entirely cease. The Persian literary tradition continued to flourish, producing poets such as Sanai of Ghazna, whose works reflected both the spiritual yearning and the disillusionment of the age. The Sufi orders, emphasizing personal devotion and mysticism, gained followers across the empire. In an age of political chaos, Sufism offered spiritual stability and comfort, providing networks that transcended political borders. One of the paradoxes of the Seljuk decline was that while political unity crumbled, the cultural foundations laid during the previous century continued to spread. The institutions of learning established by Nizam al-Mulk still operated in many cities, and the administrative practices of the Seljuks influenced successor states across the region. The concept of a Sunni Muslim ruler acting as protector of the caliph and upholder of the law survived long after the Seljuks themselves had lost their power. As the unity of the great Seljuk Empire dissolved in the wake of Malik Shah's death, the political landscape of the Middle East underwent a profound transformation. The centralized power that had once stretched from the Oxus River to the Mediterranean Sea gave way to a mosaic of regional states, some ruled by Seljuk princes, others by ambitious governors, generals, and guardians known as Atabegs. From the chaos of civil war and succession disputes emerged new powers that would dominate the politics of Syria, northern Iraq, and parts of Anatolia for more than a century. This period, though often seen as an age of decline, was also one of adaptation and innovation. The collapse of imperial unity did not destroy the institutions the Seljuks had built. Rather, these institutions evolved and localized. The Atabeg system, originally designed to educate and supervise young Seljuk princes, became a model of semi-autonomous governance. In time, the Atabegs, military guardians who combined loyalty to the Seljuk name with their own regional authority, would lay the groundwork for new dynasties and play crucial roles in resisting external threats, including the Crusaders. The term Atabeg meant Father Lord, and it referred to senior military commanders entrusted with the guardianship of a young prince, usually assigned to govern a province on behalf of the Seljuk court. During the empire's height, this system had ensured continuity and loyalty. However, after the central government weakened, the Atabegs began to rule in their own right. They maintained the facade of Seljuk legitimacy, minting coins in the Sultan's name and invoking his authority in Friday prayers, but in practice, they exercised full control over their territories. In Syria and northern Iraq, this process unfolded rapidly. After Malik Shah's death, his brother Tutush, who governed Damascus and Aleppo, declared himself Sultan of Syria, challenging his nephew Barkiyaruk's claim to the Seljuk throne. Tutush's rule, though brief, set a precedent for local independence. When he died in battle in the early 12th century, his sons Ridwan and Dukak divided his territories between them, turning Aleppo and Damascus into rival power centers. This rivalry paralyzed Muslim resistance during the First Crusade, as the two brothers spent more time fighting each other than confronting the invaders. In the aftermath of these early conflicts, the Atabeg system took firm root. In Mosul, a key strategic city on the Tigris River, the Seljuk governor Kerboga held power during the time of the First Crusade. Though he failed to relieve Antioch from the Crusaders in 1998, his position illustrated how regional commanders could wield near-sovereign power while still acknowledging nominal allegiance to the Seljuk Sultan. After his death, his successor, Aksunkur al-Hajib, governed Aleppo and laid the foundations for one of the most influential dynasties of the 12th century, the Zengids. Aksunkur's son, Imad al-Din Zengi, rose to prominence in the following generation. Appointed Atabeg of Mosul and later Aleppo, Zengi united much of northern Syria and Iraq under his rule, restoring a measure of order to regions long divided by feuds. His leadership marked the beginning of a political revival in the Muslim world's western provinces. Zengi was a skilled general and a pragmatic ruler, known for both his ruthlessness and his vision. He recognized that the survival of his domains depended on unity and reform. Zengi's reign was significant for several reasons. First, he reintroduced a sense of purpose to Muslim politics after decades of disunity. While still acknowledging the authority of the Seljuk Sultan, he governed as an independent monarch in practice. Second, he understood the importance of confronting the Crusaders, who had established fortified states across the Levant, principally in Jerusalem, Antioch, Tripoli, and Edessa. In 1044, Zengi achieved a major victory by capturing Edessa, the first of the Crusader states to fall. This triumph electrified the Islamic world, demonstrating that the invaders could be defeated and that the long-lost ideal of Muslim unity might yet be restored. Zengi's success also revived the ideology of jihad, the defense of Islam against external aggression. While earlier Seljuk rulers had focused primarily on consolidating internal power, Zengi and his successors cast their campaigns against the Crusaders in religious as well as political terms. His capture of Edessa became a rallying point, inspiring poets, scholars, and preachers to call for unity among the fractured Muslim states. However, Zengi's ambitions were cut short when he was assassinated by one of his servants in the year 1046. His empire was divided between his sons. Nur al-Din took Aleppo, and Saif al-Din Ghazi inherited Mosul. Despite this division, Nur al-Din soon emerged as the dominant figure. Nur al-Din was, in many ways, the ideal continuation of his father's legacy. A devout Sunni Muslim and a disciplined ruler, he combined military skill with deep religious conviction. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Nur al-Din viewed his authority not as personal privilege, but as a sacred trust. He sought to establish justice, curb corruption, and strengthen Islamic law throughout his domains. His court became a center of religious learning and piety, attracting scholars, jurists, and preachers from across the Muslim world. Politically, Nur al-Din succeeded where earlier Seljuk princes had failed. He managed to unite much of Syria under a single administration. Through both diplomacy and warfare, he extended his control over Aleppo, Damascus, and Hama, bringing a measure of stability to a region long fragmented by rival emirs. His consolidation of power also allowed for a more coordinated response to the Crusader threat. Nur al-Din's most enduring contribution, however, lay in the vision he articulated for Islamic unity. He saw himself not merely as a regional ruler, but as the protector of the Muslim world, a servant of the Abbasid Caliph, and a defender of the faith. To this end, he sponsored religious institutions, mosques, madrasas, hospitals, and charitable foundations throughout his realm. His building projects, such as the Great Hospital in Damascus, reflected the Seljuk tradition of combining piety with public service. Under his leadership, Muslim morale began to recover. His victories against the Crusaders in northern Syria restored confidence among Muslim armies, while his administrative reforms ensured that his state remained efficient and disciplined. Yet even Nur al-Din's influence had limits. Egypt, still under the Shia Fatimid Caliphate, remained outside his control, and the Seljuk heartlands in Persia and Iraq continued to operate as separate political entities. In time, Nur al-Din's policies would pave the way for a new figure who would dominate the next stage of Islamic resistance. The Kurdish general Salah al-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West as Saladin. Initially serving under Nur al-Din's command, Saladin rose to prominence in Egypt, where he overthrew the Fatimid regime and restored Sunni rule. After Nur al-Din's death, Saladin would inherit his mantle, uniting Egypt and Syria, and confronting the Crusaders with renewed strength. While the Zengids represented the most successful of the Atabeg dynasties, they were not alone in shaping the post-Seljuk world. In Mesopotamia and Anatolia, other Atabegs established their own realms. The Artukids, descended from one of the Seljuk generals who had served under Alp Arslan, ruled in Diyarbakir, Mardin, and Hasankeyf. They combined military vigor with patronage of architecture and the arts, leaving behind some of the most distinctive monuments of medieval Anatolia. The Danish Mens, another Turkic group, held power in north-central Anatolia, balancing between the Byzantine frontier and the Sultanate of Rum. These regional states, though politically fragmented, contributed to a remarkable cultural and economic revival. The cities of Mosul, Aleppo, and Damascus became centers of craftsmanship, trade, and intellectual life. Caravan routes connected these cities to Baghdad, Cairo, and beyond. Scholars traveled freely between courts, and Sufi orders spread spiritual teachings that emphasized devotion, humility, and unity. The political fragmentation of the post-Seljuk world thus coincided with a flourishing of cultural exchange and creativity. Yet the decentralization of power also meant that no single authority could claim to represent the entire Islamic world. The Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad, though still revered as spiritual leaders, lacked the means to impose control over the Atabegs. The great Seljuk sultans in Persia, preoccupied with their own challenges, could no longer extend their influence into Syria or Anatolia. The age of empire had given way to the age of principalities. A landscape of dynamic but competing powers, bound together by religion and shared heritage rather than political unity. By the opening of the 12th century, the once unified Seljuk Empire had splintered into several powerful but independent branches. Yet, in the eastern provinces, Khorasan, Transoxiana, and the lands of modern Iran, one ruler would rise to reclaim much of the Seljuk legacy. Sultan Sanjar, the youngest son of Malik Shah I, ascended as the last great sovereign of the great Seljuk dynasty. His reign represented both a restoration of imperial order and the twilight of Seljuk grandeur. For nearly 4 decades, Sanjar held together the Eastern Islamic world, balancing diplomacy, reform, and military might. But his rule also foreshadowed the challenges of the future: tribal revolts, steppe invasions, and the slow erosion of centralized power. Sanjar's early life prepared him well for the trials of leadership. As a young prince, he had been appointed governor of Khorasan, a vast and wealthy region stretching from Merv to Nishapur. This position gave him practical experience in administration and warfare. During his youth, the Seljuk realm had been torn by civil wars among his brothers and cousins. Through shrewd alliances and military campaigns, Sanjar gradually consolidated his control over the eastern provinces. By the time his brother Muhammad Tapar ruled as Great Seljuk Sultan in Isfahan, Sanjar had already established himself as an autonomous and formidable ruler in the east. When Muhammad Tapar died, Sanjar assumed the title of Great Sultan in the year 1118, at a time when the Seljuk world was still divided among various regional rulers. Though the empire's western branches in Syria and Anatolia operated independently, Sanjar's dominion in the east remained the heart of Seljuk power. From his capital at Merv, he governed an empire that stretched from the Oxus River to the borders of India, encompassing the cities of Nishapur, Herat, Balkh, and Ghazni. Sanjar's reign began with stability and prosperity. He inherited the administrative traditions established by Nizam al-Mulk and refined by his predecessors. His court at Merv became a center of learning, attracting poets, jurists, and scholars. The Persian language, already well established as the medium of administration and literature, flourished under his patronage. Chroniclers describe his reign as a time of fairness and cultural vibrancy when caravans traversed the trade routes of Khorasan under the protection of the Sultan's banners. One of Sanjar's primary goals was to restore unity to the fragmented Seljuk realm. He sought to reassert his authority over the western branches of the dynasty, many of which had grown increasingly independent. Through diplomacy and marriage alliances, he maintained ties with the Seljuks of Iraq and Anatolia. He also strengthened relations with the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad, continuing the long-standing Seljuk tradition of defending Sunni orthodoxy. In his correspondence with Caliph al-Mustarshid, Sanjar portrayed himself as both a protector of the faith and the rightful heir to the Seljuk legacy of just governance. However, the Sultan's ambitions inevitably led to conflict. To the west, the Seljuks of Iraq resisted his attempts to impose authority. In a decisive campaign, Sanjar marched his armies into the region and defeated his rival Mahmud II, compelling him to acknowledge his supremacy. Though Sanjar did not directly annex Iraq, his intervention reaffirmed his status as the senior Seljuk ruler. From this moment onward, his authority was recognized, at least symbolically, across much of the Islamic East. Sanjar also faced challenges along his northern frontier, where the nomadic Kara Kitai, or Black Kitai, had risen as a powerful Central Asian confederation. Descended from remnants of the Liao dynasty of China, the Kara Kitai had established a formidable empire stretching across Central Asia. Their expansion brought them into direct contact with Seljuk territories. Initially, Sanjar sought peaceful relations with them, but growing tensions over control of the Silk Road trade routes soon led to confrontation. The clash between Sanjar and the Kara Kitai culminated in the Battle of Katwan in the year 1141 near Samarkand. It was one of the most significant defeats in Seljuk history. Sanjar's army, though disciplined and experienced, was outmaneuvered by the mobile forces of the Kara Kitai, who combined steppe cavalry tactics with strategic flexibility. The battle ended in a devastating loss for the Seljuks. Thousands of troops were killed or captured, and Sanjar himself narrowly escaped. The consequences of Katwan were far-reaching. The defeat shattered Seljuk influence in Transoxiana, which fell under Kara Kitai control. It also undermined Sanjar's prestige, emboldening rebellious governors and tribes across his realm. In Khwarezm, a region along the lower Oxus River, the Khwarezm Shah dynasty began to assert independence, laying the foundation for a new power that would later dominate Central Asia. Despite this setback, Sanjar retained his throne and sought to restore stability. His ability to recover after such a blow testified to his resilience and administrative skill. He re-established order in Khorasan, repaired fortifications, and reorganized his army. However, the empire's internal structure had begun to erode. The Ikuta system, once the foundation of Seljuk military organization, was increasingly abused by local commanders who treated their land grants as hereditary possessions. Provincial loyalty weakened as local elites prioritized their own interests over those of the central government. The most serious internal threat came not from governors or nobles, but from within the Turkic tribes that had once been the backbone of the Seljuk military. Among these were the Oghuz, semi-nomadic Turkic groups who had migrated into Khorasan and served as auxiliary troops. Discontent among the Oghuz had been simmering for years due to unpaid stipends, mistreatment by local officials, and the growing power of the Persian bureaucratic class. In the early 1150s, this discontent erupted into full-scale rebellion. The Oghuz Revolt of 1153 was one of the most dramatic events of Sanjar's reign. The insurgents, combining tribal mobility with intimate knowledge of the terrain, overwhelmed several Seljuk garrisons and captured key cities, including Merv itself. Sultan Sanjar was taken prisoner, a shocking reversal for a monarch who had ruled the East for more than 3 decades. For 3 years, the once mighty sultan lived in captivity among the Oghuz tribes, an experience that chroniclers later described with a tone of tragic irony. Eventually, loyalist forces rescued Sanjar and restored him to the throne, but his authority was never the same. The Oghuz revolt had devastated Khorasan's economy and destroyed much of its urban infrastructure. The population suffered from famine and lawlessness, and many scholars and artisans fled to safer regions, such as the courts of the Khwarazm Shahs, or the new centers of power emerging in western Iran. In the final years of his reign, Sanjar ruled as a weary but dignified sovereign, determined to maintain order despite mounting difficulties. He rebuilt portions of Merv and re-established trade across the region. Yet his empire was now surrounded by ambitious neighbors, the Khwarazm Shahs in the northwest, the Kara Kitai in the northeast, and rebellious governors within his own domains. The Seljuk system, once admired for its balance of military strength and bureaucratic order, was collapsing under the strain of overextension and decentralization. Sultan Sanjar died in the year 1157, marking the end of the Great Seljuk line in the east. His death symbolized the close of an era. Though the Seljuk name would survive in Anatolia and in smaller successor states, the empire that had once dominated the heart of the Islamic world was gone. Sanjar's reign stands as a poignant reflection of the Seljuk story as a whole, a tale of ambition, unity, brilliance, and eventual decline. He had ruled longer than any other Seljuk sultan, presiding over both triumph and tragedy. Under him, Khorasan experienced a final flowering of Persian Islamic culture. Poetry, architecture, and scholarship flourished in cities like Nishapur and Herat. Yet his defeats revealed the vulnerabilities of a system built on tribal alliances and personal loyalty rather than enduring institutions. The legacy of Sultan Sanjar endured long after his death. His reign preserved the administrative and cultural traditions that would influence later dynasties, from the Khwarazm Shahs to the Timurids. His capital at Merv, though later destroyed by the Mongols, remained a symbol of Islamic learning and urban sophistication. With Sanjar's passing, the great Seljuk Empire was reduced to memory. But new powers were already emerging from its ruins. The Khwarazm Shahs, once Seljuk vassals, would soon rise to dominate Persia and Central Asia. In Anatolia, the Sultanate of Rum continued to prosper, extending Turkish Islamic civilization deeper into the Mediterranean world. The political map of the Middle East was shifting once again. The death of Sultan Sanjar in the year 1157 marked the symbolic end of the Great Seljuk Empire. For more than a century, the Seljuks had been the political and cultural nucleus of the Islamic world, uniting vast lands from Central Asia to the Mediterranean under one banner. Now, the empire had fragmented into regional powers, each claiming to inherit the Seljuk legacy. Among these emerging forces, none would prove more ambitious or more consequential than the Khwarezmian dynasty, whose rise would both continue and conclude the Seljuk story. The Khwarezmian state had begun humbly as a vassal province under the Seljuks. Centered in the region of Khwarezm, along the lower Oxus River near the Aral Sea, it had long been a vital frontier zone connecting Persia to Central Asia. Its rulers, known as the Khwarezm Shahs, had served as loyal governors under Malik Shah and Sanjar, responsible for guarding the northeastern borders and managing trade along the Silk Road. Yet, as the Seljuk power waned, these once subordinate rulers began to assert independence. The founder of the dynasty's later power was Atsiz, a Turkic commander who had been appointed by Sultan Sanjar as Khwarezm Shah in the early 12th century. Though he initially ruled as a faithful Seljuk vassal, Atsiz was ambitious. During Sanjar's captivity by the Oghuz tribes, Atsiz took advantage of the chaos to strengthen his control over Khwarezm. When Sanjar was released and attempted to reassert his authority, Atsiz resisted but later submitted again to avoid destruction. His skillful balance between defiance and loyalty set a precedent that his successors would follow. After Atsiz's death, his son Ilarslan continued to expand Khwarezm's autonomy. Ilarslan carefully navigated the turbulent politics of the post-Seljuk era, recognizing the decline of Seljuk authority in Iran while maintaining diplomatic relations with neighboring powers such as the Karakitai to the north and the Gurids to the south. Under his rule, Khwarezm became a prosperous and well-administered state, benefiting from its position as a commercial crossroads. Caravans laden with silk, spices, and precious metals passed through its cities, while scholars and artisans contributed to a growing cultural vitality. By the time of Il-Arslan's death in the mid-12th century, the Khwarezmian state was no longer a frontier dependency but a rising regional power. Its capital, Gurganj, modern Urgench, had grown into a thriving center of trade and learning. Persian culture and administration flourished there, continuing the legacy of the Seljuks while blending it with the practical vigor of the Turkic frontier. The true turning point came under Il-Arslan's son, Turkish, who ruled from the late 12th century until 1194. Turkish inherited not only a strong kingdom, but also a political opportunity. In western Iran, the Seljuk line was nearing extinction. Sultan Tugrul III, the last of the great Seljuk rulers in Persia, struggled to maintain control amid constant revolts, invasions, and shifting alliances. The Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad, once subordinate to Seljuk power, were regaining independence and often played rival princes against one another. In this volatile landscape, Turkish positioned himself as both a successor to the Seljuks and a challenger to their remaining authority. The relationship between Turkish and the Seljuks was complex, part rivalry, part inheritance. While the Khwarezm Shahs had once served as loyal governors, by Turkish's time they viewed themselves as the rightful heirs of Persian Islam. Turkish was a skilled diplomat and an aggressive military leader. He consolidated power in Khwarezm, reformed the army, and expanded his influence into the surrounding regions of Khorasan, Gurgan, and Ray. His control of trade routes and his access to the wealth of Central Asia made him one of the most powerful rulers of his generation. At the same time, the Seljuks' power was collapsing under the weight of internal weakness. After Sanjar's death, no strong leader had emerged to unify the Persian heartland. The once efficient Seljuk administration was paralyzed by rivalries among emirs and viziers. Cities like Isfahan and Nishapur, once centers of learning and prosperity, suffered from warfare and neglect. The Iqta system that had sustained Seljuk military organization had disintegrated into hereditary fiefdoms, and provincial governors ruled as independent lords in all but name. In this context, Turkish advanced westward, presenting himself as the restorer of order. When the Abbasid Caliph al-Nasir sought to curb the power of the last Seljuk ruler, Tugrul III, he turned to Turkish for assistance. Turkish accepted, marching his armies into western Iran under the banner of restoring stability. The confrontation between the two Turkic rulers came to a head near Ray in 1194. The Seljuk forces, weakened by years of decay and disunity, were defeated. Tugrul III was killed in battle, and with his death, the line of the great Seljuks came to an end. The fall of Tugrul III was not simply the death of a monarch. It was the symbolic conclusion of an era that had defined the Islamic Middle Ages. For more than 150 years, the Seljuks had been the protectors of the Sunni world, the defenders of the Abbasid Caliphate, and the patrons of a great cultural renaissance. Now, their place was taken by a new dynasty, the Khwarezm Shahs, who inherited both their legacy and their burdens. Under Turkish and his son, Ala al-Din Muhammad, the Khwarezmian Empire would grow into one of the most formidable powers of the early 13th century. But even in their ascendancy, the Khwarezm Shahs remained tied to the Seljuk past. Their administrative systems, coinage, and royal ceremonies echoed Seljuk traditions. Persian remained the language of the court, and Sunni Islam continued to be the ideological foundation of the state. In this sense, the Khwarezm Shahs were both successors and imitators, a new dynasty built upon the structures the Seljuks had created. The end of the great Seljuks in Persia did not mean the disappearance of Seljuk influence altogether. In Anatolia, the Sultanate of Rum continued to flourish, maintaining the cultural and political spirit of the dynasty for another century. There, Turkish migration, Persian culture, and Islamic faith combined to create a vibrant civilization that would later nurture the roots of the Ottoman Empire. The Rum Seljuks would carry forward the architectural styles, administrative systems, and intellectual traditions first shaped under Malik Shah and Nizam al-Mulk. In the east, however, the passing of the great Seljuks left a void that even the Khwarezm-Shahs could not entirely fill. The balance of power that had once stabilized the Islamic world began to shift. The Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad, emboldened by the decline of their former protectors, sought greater independence. The Crusader states in the Levant remained a lingering threat, though their influence was checked by new Muslim leaders like Saladin. Farther east, the Kara-Katai still controlled parts of Central Asia, maintaining a fragile peace with Khwarezm. Yet beyond the steppes, an even greater storm was brewing. The Mongol tribes were uniting under a leader whose ambitions would surpass all who came before. For contemporaries, the fall of the Seljuks was viewed with both sorrow and inevitability. Chroniclers, such as Ibn al-Athir, described their decline as a tragedy brought about by arrogance, division, and the loss of moral purpose. The Seljuks, once champions of justice and unity, had allowed greed and rivalry to undermine their strength. Yet these same historians also acknowledged their lasting contributions, their defense of Islam, their patronage of learning, and their creation of an enduring political model. Indeed, the Seljuk achievement cannot be measured solely by their political lifespan. They redefined Islamic governance by combining Turkic military tradition with Persian bureaucratic culture and Sunni religious legitimacy. Their system of rule, anchored in the Ikoda system, guided by the ulama, and enriched by Persian literature, became the blueprint for many later empires, including the Mamluks, Timurids, Safavids, and Ottomans. While the great Seljuk Empire faded in the east, its Anatolian branch, the Sultanate of Rum, was quietly transforming the political and cultural landscape of Asia Minor. Born from the aftermath of the Battle of Manzikert, the Sultanate of Rum carried forward the Seljuk name, spirit, and system, but on a smaller and more localized scale. It would become the nucleus of Turkish Islamic civilization in Anatolia, a bridge between the worlds of the steppe and the Mediterranean, and the seed from which future powers like the Ottomans would grow. The word Rum derived from Rome, the Muslim term for the Byzantine Empire, whose lands in Anatolia had been conquered and settled by the Turks. The founders of this new state were not emperors of vast domains like Tughril or Malik Shah, but frontier lords, warriors who combined the discipline of the steppe with the faith and institutions of Islam. The first ruler, Süleyman ibn Kutalmish, a cousin of Alp Arslan, had established control over much of western Anatolia during the late 11th century. After capturing the city of Nicaea, he proclaimed himself Sultan, founding the state that would bear the Seljuk name for generations. Süleyman's reign was brief but foundational. His death in battle against the great Seljuk ruler Tutush of Syria temporarily threw the new sultanate into disarray, but his lineage endured. His descendants would rebuild and strengthen Rum, turning a loose tribal confederation into a durable kingdom. By the early 12th century, the Sultanate of Rum had emerged as an independent polity centered in central Anatolia, with its capital eventually established at Konya. Anatolia at this time was a land of transition and fusion. The devastation of Byzantine authority after Manzikert had created a patchwork of territories controlled by Turkish clans, Greek magnates, and Armenian princes. The Seljuks of Rum faced the dual challenge of uniting the Turkic tribes under a single government and integrating the local Christian populations into a stable society. Their success in achieving both tasks made the Sultanate one of the most dynamic and enduring states of the medieval Islamic world. Under Sultan Kilij Arslan I, the son of Suleiman, the Sultanate survived one of its first major crises, the arrival of the First Crusade. When the Crusaders marched across Anatolia toward the Levant in the late 11th century, Kilij Arslan confronted them near Nicaea but was forced to withdraw after a fierce battle. The Crusaders captured Nicaea and pushed eastward, devastating much of central Anatolia. The Seljuks retreated to Konya, which would soon become their new capital and a symbol of their resilience. Despite the setback, the Sultanate endured, rebuilding its strength while the Crusaders turned south toward Syria and Palestine. In the decades that followed, the Sultanate of Rum stabilized and expanded its authority across central and eastern Anatolia. Kilij Arslan's successors pursued a policy of consolidation, balancing warfare with diplomacy. They made peace treaties with Byzantium when necessary and waged campaigns against rival Turkish principalities known as the Danish Mends, who had established their own domains in northern and eastern Anatolia. These conflicts were not only struggles for territory, but also contests for legitimacy among the emerging Turkish powers of the region. By the mid-12th century, the Sultanate entered a new phase of growth and prosperity under Kilij Arslan II. His reign marked the true consolidation of Seljuk power in Anatolia. He reunited the divided Turkish principalities, subdued rebellious emirs, and reasserted control over key cities such as Kayseri, Sivas, and Malatya. His policies strengthened the central authority of the Sultanate and brought a measure of unity to the Anatolian plateau. One of Kilij Arslan's most remarkable achievements was his victory at the Battle of Myriokephalon in the year 1176. The Byzantine Emperor Manuel Komnenos, seeking to restore imperial control over Anatolia, launched a massive campaign against the Seljuks. His army advanced deep into the Anatolian interior, confident of victory. But Kilij Arslan, drawing on the traditions of steppe warfare, used the rugged terrain to his advantage. Near the narrow passes of Myriokephalon, his forces ambushed the Byzantine army, inflicting a crushing defeat. The battle's outcome was decisive in its symbolism. Just as Manzikert had opened Anatolia to Turkish settlement a century earlier, Myriokephalon confirmed that the Byzantine Empire would never again reclaim the Anatolian heartland. The Sultanate's survival and triumph ensured that the region's future would be shaped by Turkish and Islamic influences. The Byzantines remained a formidable power along the western coast and in Constantinople, but the interior of Anatolia was now firmly within the Seljuk sphere. Following this victory, Kilij Arslan II turned his attention to internal development. He reorganized the Sultanate's administration, relying on Persian bureaucrats and Islamic scholars to build a stable government. Like their eastern predecessors, the Rum Seljuks adopted the Ikuta system, granting land revenues to military officers in exchange for service. This arrangement allowed them to maintain a strong army without overburdening the central treasury. The Sultan also encouraged trade and urban growth, laying the foundations for an economic revival that would flourish in the next century. Culturally, the Sultanate of Rum became a meeting ground of civilizations. Turkish nomads settled among Greek and Armenian villagers, creating a rich mosaic of languages, customs, and artistic traditions. The Seljuk rulers respected the Christian and Jewish communities within their realm, granting them autonomy in exchange for taxes. This pragmatic tolerance helped the Sultanate maintain stability and attract settlers from neighboring regions. Architecture and art flourished as symbols of the new Anatolian identity. Mosques, caravanserais, and madrasas were constructed across the Sultanate, blending Persian, Arab, and Byzantine styles. The use of stone carving, geometric ornamentation, and monumental gates gave Rum Seljuk architecture a distinct character that would later influence Ottoman design. Cities like Konya, Kayseri, and Sivas emerged as centers of learning and trade, linked by networks of roads and caravan stations that facilitated commerce between the Mediterranean and Central Asia. The Seljuk court in Konya became a vibrant hub of culture. Persian remained the language of administration and literature, but Turkish began to gain prominence as a spoken and poetic medium. The blend of Persian sophistication, Islamic scholarship, and Turkic vigor created a unique cultural synthesis. Sufi mysticism also found fertile ground in Anatolia during this period. Traveling dervishes and scholars brought spiritual teachings that emphasized devotion, humility, and the unity of all creation. This movement would later produce figures such as Jalal al-Din Rumi, whose poetry would flourish in Konya under later sultans. The sultans of Rum also pursued an active foreign policy, balancing relations with Byzantium, the Crusader states, and neighboring Muslim powers. Kilij Arslan II skillfully alternated between diplomacy and war, securing peace treaties when beneficial and exploiting Byzantine weaknesses when opportunities arose. His successors maintained this pragmatic approach, ensuring the survival and prosperity of the Sultanate amid a complex and often hostile geopolitical environment. Economically, the Rum Seljuks revitalized Anatolia's role as a commercial crossroads. They repaired old Roman and Byzantine roads, constructed caravanserais for merchants, and safeguarded trade routes that connected the Black Sea ports to the Mediterranean and the interior plains. These investments encouraged the flow of goods and ideas, linking the Sultanate to the broader Islamic world. Markets in Konya and Kayseri bustled with traders from Persia, Syria, and the Caucasus, while Anatolian craftsmen produced textiles, ceramics, and metalwork renowned for their quality. The political stability and economic growth of the Sultanate fostered a new social order. The Turkish military elite became increasingly settled, forming a landed aristocracy that supported urban development and cultural patronage. The Persian bureaucratic class continued to manage administration and finance, while Islamic scholars ensured the dominance of Sunni orthodoxy. At the same time, the Sultanate's inclusive policies allowed local Christians and Armenians to serve as merchants, artisans, and officials, contributing to a pluralistic society rare in the medieval world. At the turn of the 13th century, the Sultanate of Rum stood as one of the most dynamic and prosperous states in the Islamic world. Having survived wars, migrations, and religious upheavals, the Anatolian Seljuks had transformed their once fractured frontier realm into a powerful, organized, and culturally vibrant kingdom. This transformation reached its peak during the reign of Ala al-Din Keykubat I, whose rule marked the zenith of the Rum Seljuk state. Under his leadership, the Sultanate expanded its frontiers, strengthened its economy, and fostered a golden age of art, architecture, and learning that made Anatolia a centerpiece of the Eastern Mediterranean world. Ala al-Din Keykubat I ascended to the throne in the early 13th century, following a period of internal turbulence. His father, Keykusra I, had successfully re-established Seljuk authority after years of instability and had recaptured the city of Antalya from the Byzantines, securing the Sultanate's first major Mediterranean port. Upon his death, power passed to his sons, Kaykaus and Keykubad, whose rivalry briefly threatened to divide the kingdom. But after a short struggle, Keykubad emerged victorious and ascended as the undisputed ruler. His rise to power was not merely the continuation of a dynasty, it was the beginning of an era of confident statecraft and expansive vision. From the outset of his reign, Keykubad set out to consolidate and expand the Sultanate's influence both by land and by sea. Recognizing that control of trade routes was the key to wealth and security, he pursued an ambitious program of fortification and urban development. He understood Anatolia's strategic value as the crossroads between East and West and sought to make it the economic heart of the region. Keykubad's military campaigns reflected this vision. In the early years of his rule, he turned his attention to the eastern frontier, where the powerful Artukid and Mengujakid principalities still held sway. Through a combination of diplomacy and force, he brought these territories under Seljuk authority, extending his rule across much of eastern Anatolia. He also strengthened ties with the Ayyubids in Syria, including the successors of Saladin, ensuring that the southern frontier remained peaceful. This allowed him to focus on his true ambitions, to transform the Sultanate of Rum into a maritime and commercial power. The capture of the Black Sea port of Sinop was one of Keykubad's most important achievements. The city, long a prize contested between Byzantines and Turks, became the Sultanate's northern gateway to the world. Under Seljuk rule, Sinop was rebuilt with fortified walls, harbors, and shipyards. It soon emerged as a major center of shipbuilding and international trade. The conquest of Sinop not only secured control of the northern coast, but also opened direct access to trade routes linking Anatolia with Crimea, the Caucasus, and beyond. Keykubad followed this success with another decisive campaign along the southern coast. He expanded the port of Alanya, then known as Kalanoros, and renamed it in his own honor. There, he constructed an impressive fortress and naval base, including the famous Red Tower, whose massive red brick walls symbolized Seljuk strength and maritime ambition. From Alanya, the Seljuk navy patrolled the Mediterranean, protecting merchant fleets and projecting power across the coastal regions. The Sultan's investment in maritime infrastructure transformed the Sultanate of Rum into a hub of Mediterranean commerce. Ships from Genoa, Venice, and Pisa docked in Seljuk ports, exchanging goods from Europe for the spices, silks, and precious metals of the East. The Sultan's government encouraged this trade by guaranteeing safety for merchants and by building a network of caravanserais, fortified inns where traders could rest and store their goods. Dozens of these caravanserais were constructed along the major trade routes, their massive stone walls and ornate portals standing as symbols of security and prosperity. Kekubad's reign also marked a high point in architecture and urban planning. Following the tradition established by earlier Seljuk rulers, he sponsored the construction of mosques, madrasas, and palaces across his realm. Yet his building projects displayed an unprecedented scale and refinement. The Sultan's palace at Alanya, perched on a cliff overlooking the sea, combined Islamic, Persian, and Byzantine elements, showcasing the cosmopolitan character of the Sultanate. In Konya, the capital, new mosques and madrasas reflected both religious devotion and intellectual vitality. The Ala al-Din Mosque, one of the most magnificent monuments of the period, was completed under his reign. Built on a hill at the heart of the city, it symbolized the unity of spiritual and political authority. The Sultan also founded institutions of learning where scholars studied theology, law, mathematics, and astronomy. These schools continued the legacy of the earlier Nizamiya institutions, ensuring that the Seljuk synthesis of religion, science, and governance remained alive in Anatolia. Culturally, Kekubad's court became a beacon of artistic and intellectual brilliance. Poets and scholars from Persia, Syria, and Central Asia flocked to Konya, attracted by the Sultan's patronage. Persian remained the language of literature and administration, while Turkish continued to evolve as a language of daily life and oral poetry. Sufi mystics, philosophers, and scientists found a welcoming atmosphere at court. This blending of diverse traditions produced a unique cultural identity that would shape Anatolia for centuries to come. Economically, the Sultanate of Rum reached new heights of prosperity. The stability of Kekubad's rule encouraged agricultural development and urban growth. Irrigation systems were expanded, new farmlands cultivated, and cities flourished as centers of trade and craftsmanship. Taxation was reformed to promote commerce and reduce corruption. The revenues thus generated allowed for continued investment in infrastructure, defense, and public works. The Seljuk emphasis on trade and security made Anatolia one of the safest and most prosperous regions of the medieval world. Travelers from distant lands noted the orderliness of its cities, the reliability of its roads, and the hospitality of its people. The Sultanate's wealth was not built on conquest alone, but on the stability and openness of its economy, a remarkable achievement in an age often defined by war and instability. Kekubad also sought to balance power between the various groups within his realm. The Turkish tribal warriors who had formed the military backbone of the Sultanate were integrated into the administrative system through land grants and military offices. The Persian bureaucrats continued to manage state affairs, while local Greeks and Armenians played important roles in trade and craftsmanship. This inclusiveness helped maintain internal harmony and allowed the Sultanate to harness the talents of its diverse population. Politically, Kekubad displayed both vision and restraint. Unlike many medieval rulers, he avoided reckless wars of expansion and instead pursued alliances and diplomacy. His marriage to a daughter of the Ayyubid house strengthened ties with Syria and Egypt, while his correspondence with the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad affirmed his legitimacy as a champion of Sunni Islam. By skillfully balancing regional interests, Kekubad ensured that the Sultanate of Rum remained secure amid the shifting alliances of the Near East. However, even during this golden age, challenges were emerging on the horizon. The Mongols, who had already begun their westward conquests in Central Asia, were gradually moving closer to the Islamic heartlands. Reports of their campaigns and the destruction of cities like Bukhara and Samarkand reached Anatolia, spreading both fear and curiosity. Kayqubad, aware of the growing threat, sought to strengthen his defenses and maintain diplomatic contact with the Mongols to avoid confrontation. Despite these concerns, Kayqubad's reign remained largely peaceful and prosperous. His rule represented the culmination of 2 centuries of Turkish and Islamic adaptation in Anatolia, a period in which nomadic warriors had become statesmen, conquerors had become builders, and the frontier had become a flourishing civilization. The Sultan's combination of military discipline, economic foresight, and cultural patronage established a model of governance that later rulers would strive to emulate. When Ala al-Din Kayqubad I died in the late 1200s, possibly through poisoning, his death marked the end of the Sultanate of Rum's greatest age. His successors inherited a realm at the height of its power but lacked his skill and vision. Internal rivalries among the royal family, coupled with growing external pressures, would soon test the strength of the foundations he had built. The golden age of the Sultanate of Rum under Ala al-Din Kayqubad I had been a time of wealth, stability, and confidence, but history rarely allows peace to endure for long. In the decades following his death, Anatolia, so recently a beacon of prosperity, was drawn into the path of one of the most devastating forces in world history, the Mongol invasions. The coming of the Mongols would mark the beginning of the end for the Seljuk state in Anatolia, dismantling its political unity, crippling its economy, and paving the way for a new era of fragmentation and transformation. When Ala al-Din Kayqubad died suddenly in the late 1200s, his death left the throne contested. His son, Ghiyath al-Din Kayhusra II, succeeded him, but his reign lacked the stability and vision that had defined his father's. Kayhusra inherited an empire that appeared strong on the surface, but was increasingly vulnerable beneath. The prosperity of the Golden Age had fostered complacency among the ruling elite, while growing rivalries among court factions and the military weakened central control. The powerful Turkish tribal leaders, Persian bureaucrats, and Christian administrators who had once cooperated under Kayqubad now competed for influence. At the same time, the Mongol Empire was expanding rapidly westward under the command of Chinggis Khan's successors. By the early 13th century, the Mongols had destroyed the Khwarezmian Empire, conquered much of Central Asia, and begun their incursions into the Islamic world. Cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, once jewels of civilization, lay in ruins. Refugees poured westward, carrying tales of terror and destruction. The Mongol armies, under generals such as Subutai and Batu, had already reached the Caucasus and the northern shores of the Black Sea, bringing them dangerously close to the borders of Anatolia. Initially, Sultan Kayhusra II underestimated the Mongol threat. Confident in the Sultanate's wealth and army, he focused on court intrigues and diplomatic rivalries rather than preparing for the impending invasion. His court at Konya became known for luxury and excess, in sharp contrast to the disciplined governance of his father. Kayhusra surrounded himself with favorites and advisors who flattered rather than counseled him, while capable generals and administrators were sidelined. The first major confrontation between the Sultanate of Rum and the Mongols came in the year 1243 at the Battle of Kosedag near Sivas in eastern Anatolia. The Mongol forces, led by Baiju Noyan, were relatively small compared to the vast army assembled by the Seljuks. Kayhusra's troops included not only Turkish warriors but also contingents from vassal states and mercenaries from Georgia and other regions. Despite their numerical superiority, the Seljuk forces lacked coordination and discipline. The Mongols, masters of maneuver and deception, exploited this weakness. As the two armies met on the rugged slopes of Kosedag, the Mongols executed their characteristic tactic of feigned retreat. Believing the enemy to be in flight, the Seljuk forces pursued, breaking formation. At that moment, the Mongols wheeled around and encircled them, unleashing a devastating counterattack. The Seljuk army collapsed in confusion, and Khusrau fled the battlefield. The defeat was total. The consequences of Kosedag were catastrophic. The Mongols advanced westward, sacking cities and imposing their authority across Anatolia. Konya itself was spared only through submission. Khusrau was forced to acknowledge Mongol suzerainty, agreeing to pay tribute and to govern as a vassal of the Great Khan. The once proud Sultanate of Rum was now reduced to a client state under Mongol domination. The immediate aftermath of the defeat saw chaos and humiliation. Mongol envoys and tax collectors arrived to oversee the collection of tribute, while the Sultan's authority was undermined by rival emirs who sought to profit from the new order. Many Turkish tribes, resentful of Mongol control, migrated westward into the frontier zones near the Byzantine border, where they would later form the seeds of independent principalities. The economic disruption caused by the invasion was severe. Trade routes that had flourished under Kekubad's reign were disrupted, cities were looted, and agricultural production declined. Sultan Khusrau II died a few years later, leaving behind 3 young sons. The Mongols, masters of divide and rule politics, exploited the ensuing succession crisis to tighten their grip on Anatolia. The Seljuk realm was partitioned among the brothers. One ruled from Konya, another from Sivas, and the third from Kayseri. This division effectively ended any semblance of unity within the Sultanate. Real power now rested in the hands of Mongol governors and local Turkish warlords. Under Mongol rule, the Sultanate of Rum became part of the vast dominion of the Ilkhanate, the Mongol state established in Persia. While the Seljuk name remained, the sultans were little more than figureheads. The Mongols appointed naibs, deputy governors, who collected taxes and enforced order in the name of the khans. The heavy burden of tribute drained the Anatolian economy, while Mongol military garrisons maintained control through intimidation. Despite this grim political reality, the period of Mongol domination was not one of total collapse. In many cities, daily life continued, and trade gradually revived under Mongol protection. The Pax Mongolica, the peace enforced across much of Asia by Mongol power, allowed long-distance commerce to resume, linking Anatolia with China, Central Asia, and the Mediterranean once again. However, this revival benefited merchants and Mongol officials more than the local population. For ordinary people, especially peasants and artisans, the weight of taxation and the disruption of war brought hardship. The Mongol conquest also accelerated the process of decentralization in Anatolia. As the central government weakened, Turkish tribal leaders, known as beys, began to assert autonomy over their territories. These frontier lords established small principalities, or beyliks, that gradually evolved into independent states. Among them were the Germanids, Karamanids, Aydinids, and Ottomans, names that would later shape the political map of Anatolia. The fragmentation of authority that the Mongols had encouraged would ultimately give rise to new centers of power. Culturally, the Mongol period produced a paradoxical mixture of destruction and renewal. While some cities were devastated, others became vibrant centers of cultural exchange. The Mongol rulers, though often ruthless in war, were pragmatic administrators. They tolerated different religions and relied on local officials to govern. As a result, scholars, Sufis, and craftsmen continued to thrive in regions like Konya and Sivas. The influence of Persian culture, already strong under the Seljuks, deepened further as Ilkhanid administrators brought Persian bureaucratic practices and artistic traditions into Anatolia. Sufism in particular experienced remarkable growth during this turbulent period. As political institutions crumbled, spiritual orders provided stability and community. Konya, despite political decline, remained a center of mysticism and learning. It was during this time that Jalal al-Din Rumi composed his immortal Masnavi, a work that transcended sectarian boundaries and spoke to the universal longing for divine love and unity. The teachings of Rumi and other Sufi masters gave solace to a society scarred by violence and uncertainty. The decline of the Seljuk state under Mongol rule also reshaped Anatolia's social fabric. The influx of nomadic Turks from the east, fleeing Mongol devastation in Central Asia, increased the Turkish population and spread Islamic culture deeper into the countryside. These new settlers often came into conflict with local Christian communities, but over time, intermingling and cultural exchange produced a unique Anatolian identity: Turkish in language, Islamic in faith, and Anatolian in heritage. By the mid-13th century, the Sultanate of Rum had ceased to function as a coherent political entity. The last nominal Seljuk rulers, such as Iz al-Din Kaikous II and Rukn al-Din Kilij Arslan IV, ruled only at the pleasure of the Mongols and often competed with one another for survival. When disputes arose, the Ilkhanid governors intervened directly, deposing or installing sultans as they pleased. The once mighty Seljuk court at Konya became a shadow of its former self, filled with intrigue but devoid of power. By the year 1277, the Sultanate effectively disintegrated. The Mongols no longer needed the Seljuk framework to administer Anatolia. They relied instead on direct rule through their own governors and alliances with local beys. The Seljuk dynasty, which had begun with the migrations of nomads along the Sirdarya and reached its zenith under Malik Shah and Nizam al-Mulk, now faded into history. Yet even in its fall, the Seljuk legacy endured. The Mongol conquest did not erase the institutions, language, and culture that the Seljuks had built. Persian remained the language of administration and poetry, Turkish the language of the people, and Islam the unifying faith. The caravanserais, mosques, and madrasas that the Seljuks had constructed continued to serve travelers, scholars, and worshippers. Their architectural style, with its pointed arches and intricate stonework, became the hallmark of Anatolian art and inspired future generations of builders. Most importantly, the political and cultural foundations laid by the Seljuks provided the framework upon which the next great Anatolian power would rise. In the western frontier near the Byzantine borderlands, a small principality under a leader named Osman began to assert itself. It was one of many beyliks that had emerged in the wake of Mongol rule, yet it would grow to eclipse them all. The Ottomans, heirs of both the Seljuk and Islamic traditions, would one day forge a new empire that would stretch across 3 continents. When the last Seljuk rulers faded from the stage of history in the late 13th century, it might have seemed that their age had ended in ruin. Their empire had fragmented, their cities had fallen under foreign domination, and their once mighty armies had been broken by the Mongol onslaught. Yet the true measure of a civilization lies not only in its conquests, but in what it leaves behind. In this sense, the Seljuk legacy did not die. It transformed, living on in the institutions, art, learning, and political traditions that shaped the Middle East for centuries to come. The Seljuks had not merely conquered an empire. They had built the foundations of a new Islamic world that bridged the steppe and the city, the nomad and the scholar, the Turk and the Persian. The transformation that the Seljuks initiated was perhaps their greatest achievement. When they first appeared on the horizon of Islamic history in the 10th century, they were nomads from the Central Asian steppes, unfamiliar with the urban civilizations of Persia and Mesopotamia. Yet within 2 generations, they had absorbed the sophisticated traditions of governance, religion, and culture that they found in those lands. Under the leadership of figures like Tugrul Beg, Alp Arslan, Malik Shah, and Nizam al-Mulk, the Seljuks fused Turkic martial vigor with Persian administrative genius and Islamic spiritual legitimacy. This synthesis became the enduring model for many later Muslim empires, from the Mamluks of Egypt to the Ottomans of Anatolia. One of the Seljuks' most lasting contributions was their reshaping of Islamic political thought. Before their rise, the Muslim world was fragmented, and the authority of the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad had waned. The Seljuks restored the prestige of the caliphate, not by replacing it, but by protecting it. Tugrul Beg's entrance into Baghdad in the mid-11th century marked a turning point in the balance of power between the sword and the pen. The Seljuks ruled as military protectors of the caliph, recognizing his spiritual supremacy while exercising temporal authority. This model, of a sultan ruling under the nominal authority of a caliph, became the standard form of governance in the Sunni Islamic world for centuries. The vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, gave philosophical depth and administrative form to this system. His Siyasatnama, the Book of Government, became a manual of Islamic statecraft, emphasizing justice, consultation, and the moral duty of rulers. He argued that power without justice was tyranny, and justice without power was weakness. His emphasis on the rule of law, the importance of scholars, and the moral accountability of rulers influenced not only later Persian and Turkish dynasties, but also political theorists as far away as India. The Ottoman viziers of later centuries would see themselves as heirs to Nizam al-Mulk's vision of ordered governance under divine law. Equally transformative was the Seljuk contribution to education and religious life. The Nizamiya madrasas, founded under Nizam al-Mulk's patronage, became the first truly organized network of higher learning in the Islamic world. These institutions trained jurists, theologians, and administrators who would serve in courts and mosques from Baghdad to Nishapur. They helped unify the Sunni tradition at a time when sectarian divisions threatened to fragment the Ummah. Through these schools, the Seljuks nurtured a new intellectual elite, the ulama, whose influence would outlast any dynasty. The Seljuks also presided over a remarkable cultural flowering. Under Malik Shah, the Persian language achieved a new prominence as the medium of administration and literature. Court poets such as Anvari, Muizzi, and later Omar Khayyam transformed Persian verse into a vehicle of both beauty and wisdom. Their poetry celebrated not only love and nature, but also the philosophical questions of fate, destiny, and the human search for meaning. The revival of Persian literature under Seljuk patronage gave rise to the New Persian language, which would later become the cultural lingua franca of the Islamic world from Delhi to Istanbul. In science and architecture, too, the Seljuks left an indelible mark. The observatories and academies established during Malik Shah's reign, including the one led by Omar Khayyam, advanced astronomy and mathematics. Their reform of the calendar, the Jalali calendar, remained among the most accurate in human history until modern times. Architecturally, the Seljuks pioneered new styles that blended Persian artistry with Islamic geometry and Turkic monumentality. Their use of the pointed arch, the ribbed dome, and elaborate stone carving influenced mosque design across the Middle East. The Great Mosque of Isfahan, the tomb towers of Khorasan, and the caravanserais of Anatolia remain silent witnesses to their aesthetic and technical mastery. In Anatolia, the Seljuks of Rum expanded on this architectural legacy, leaving behind a landscape dotted with masterpieces of medieval Islamic design. The Ala al-Din Mosque in Konya, the Inchi Minareli Madrasa in the same city, and the Karatai Madrasa in Sivas are enduring testaments to the artistic synthesis of Persian, Byzantine, and Turkic traditions. Their caravanserais, monumental stone inns built along the trade routes, stand as symbols of both practical governance and artistic ambition. These structures, with their grand portals and intricate patterns, conveyed both power and hospitality. They protected travelers, encouraged commerce, and made Anatolia a secure corridor for the movement of goods and ideas. Economically, the Seljuks revitalized the Silk Road trade networks that had decayed during the earlier centuries of warfare. Their control of key routes across Persia and Anatolia allowed merchants to move freely between east and west. Caravanserais, fortified bridges, and policing of the highways ensured security for traders. The prosperity that flowed from this commerce sustained their cities and funded their artistic and educational institutions. Even after their political decline, the infrastructure they built continued to enrich the lands they once ruled. The Seljuk synthesis of cultures was perhaps their most remarkable legacy. They brought together the nomadic ethos of the Turkic steppes with the sophisticated urban traditions of Persia and the Islamic Middle East. The result was a new kind of civilization, dynamic, adaptable, and inclusive. Their armies were Turkic, their administrators Persian, their religion Arabic, and their culture a blend of all three. This fusion created a lasting identity that transcended ethnicity and geography, binding the Islamic world together in a shared heritage. Religiously, the Seljuks played a critical role in shaping the spiritual landscape of the Middle East. Their patronage of Sunni Islam strengthened the orthodox schools of law and theology, ensuring their dominance over competing sects. At the same time, the Seljuk period witnessed the rise of Sufism as a popular religious movement. While the early Seljuk rulers had viewed mysticism with suspicion, later sultans and their Anatolian successors embraced it as a source of moral renewal and social cohesion. The spread of Sufi orders, particularly the Mevlevis, inspired by Jalal al-Din Rumi, created spiritual networks that transcended political boundaries. These communities became custodians of learning, charity, and art during times of political fragmentation. Politically, the Seljuks established patterns of governance that influenced every major Islamic dynasty that followed. Their system of delegated authority, granting land revenues (iqta) to military commanders in return for service, became the backbone of Islamic feudalism. Though it contributed to decentralization in later centuries, it also ensured military readiness and rewarded loyalty. The administrative hierarchies they developed, combining tribal customs with Persian bureaucracy, survived long after their empire's collapse. The Mongols, Ilkhanids, Timurids, and Ottomans all borrowed from Seljuk administrative traditions. In the broader arc of world history, the Seljuks played a crucial intermediary role between the ancient and early modern worlds. They preserved and transmitted the intellectual heritage of the classical Islamic Golden Age to later generations. Their patronage of scholars ensured the survival of works in philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and mathematics. They also laid the political groundwork for the rise of the Ottomans, who would see themselves as the rightful heirs to Seljuk legitimacy. The connection between the Seljuks and the Ottomans was more than symbolic. Many of the early Ottoman institutions, the use of Persian as a court language, the organization of the army, the relationship between sultan and scholar, and even the architectural styles of mosques were direct continuations of Seljuk precedents. The Ottoman founder, Osman, and his successors traced their lineage back to the Seljuk tradition of frontier lords, or beys, who combined military strength with religious legitimacy. The very idea of the Ghazi, the holy warrior fighting on the frontier of Islam, was inherited from Seljuk ideals forged during their struggles against Byzantium and the Crusaders. Culturally, the Seljuk period was the seedbed of a new artistic and intellectual order that would flourish under the Ottomans and beyond. In language, the fusion of Turkish, Persian, and Arabic vocabulary produced a rich literary medium that later Ottoman poets would perfect. In art, the geometric motifs, calligraphy, and tilework pioneered in Seljuk architecture became hallmarks of Islamic aesthetics. In philosophy and mysticism, the Seljuk Age's emphasis on synthesis and tolerance created a spiritual climate in which thinkers like Rumi and Ibn Arabi could thrive. The fall of the Seljuk Empire did not mark the end of its world, it marked its diffusion. Its political power fragmented, but its cultural and intellectual influence spread wider than ever. Through their Anatolian successors, the Seljuks became the bridge by which the heritage of the medieval Islamic East flowed into the Ottoman and, ultimately, into the modern world. In the long view of history, the Seljuks were both conquerors and cultivators, destroyers and builders. They came from the steppes as warriors, but became the architects of cities, patrons of learning, and protectors of faith. They revived a caliphate that had nearly collapsed, defended Islam against its enemies, and fostered an age of creativity and exchange that reshaped the Islamic world. Their story is not merely the tale of a dynasty that rose and fell. It is the story of transformation, of how a nomadic people became the stewards of civilization, and how their legacy continued to shape empires long after their banners had vanished from the field. The Seljuks gave the Islamic world a new political and cultural identity, one that united strength with wisdom, power with justice, and faith with reason. And so, though their empire faded beneath the Mongol storm and gave way to new dynasties, the Seljuk legacy lived on. In the minarets of Konya, the courtyards of Isfahan, the calligraphy of Persian poets, and the enduring ideals of Islamic governance. From their triumphs and their trials emerged a world that was, in every sense, greater than the sum of its parts. The Seljuks had come from the steppe, but they left behind a civilization.